Hey, everybody. Tonight we're debating Israel versus Palestine, and we are starting right now with Ben's opening statement. Thanks for being with us, Dr. Ben Burgess. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. So I know we have very limited time for these openings, but I just want to quickly sketch out why I don't think my country, which is of course also Stephen's country, should be supporting Israel. Not in general, and certainly not right now, while Israel is committing really jaw-dropping crimes against the civilian population of Gaza. I have a problem with the last several decades of US-Israeli alliance because I think Israel is an apartheid state, and it's bad to support apartheid states. I realize that apartheid is going to sound like hyperbole to a lot of people's ears tonight. Silly radical leftist stuff. It's probably an exaggeration. But I think it's a simple fact. Israel has ruled over millions of West Bank and Gaza Palestinians for 57 years since Lyndon Johnson was president of this country without giving them citizenship. During some parts of that 57-year period, there's been some level of pretense that this was a temporary military occupation, not a long-term absorption of the territory. But now that pretense is long gone. Israel's current prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has said over and over again that there will never, under any circumstances, be a Palestinian state. In other words, we're never, ever going to leave, and we're never, ever going to give you guys equal rights. We're just going to keep ruling over you as rightsless non-citizen intervention until the end of time. That's the explicit policy. And of course, even decades before Netanyahu first took office, Israel was building cities of its own citizens on this allegedly temporarily occupied land. Between 5 and 10% of Israeli Jews, depending on which numbers you believe, live in West Bank settlements, about 500,000 people. And what there's been since 1967 has, in essence, been a single apartheid state from the river to the sea. Israeli settlers in the West Bank are considered for every legal purpose to live in Israel rather than living abroad. They vote in Israeli elections when they're accused of crimes. They're tried in real civilian courts, not military courts. Their Palestinian neighbors lack all of these rights. And that's the West Bank, where the form the occupation takes is positively soft compared to Gaza. Nobody is dropping 2,000-pound bombs on tent cities full of terrified refugees in the West Bank. Ruling over a huge non-citizen population for decades inevitably leads to a dynamic of dehumanization, where the inevitable resistance, some of which, to be sure, takes forms I find morally indefensible, is met with increasingly brutal forms of collective punishment of the entire population. So after the most extreme right-wing government in Israel's history took office a couple of years ago, 2023 was the worst year on record for settler pogroms against the non-citizen population in the West Bank. And at the same time, the US and Israel were pushing a strategy of regional normalization at the expense of the Palestinians, which would have taken away the last card Palestinians still had in their hands, which was the nominal solidarity of surrounding Arab states. And unsurprisingly, as the pogroms against West Bank Palestinians were happening and these diplomatic moves were playing out, eventually the more militant of the two main Palestinian factions responded with some atrocities of their own on October 7th. And since then, Israel has responded with atrocities against the entire population of Gaza, the part of Palestine where that faction is concentrated, on an absolutely brain-melting scale. More children have died in Gaza in the last 9 months than in all the war zones in the world for years beforehand. Millions of people, that's 85% of the civilian population, have been displaced from their homes at gunpoint. That's not collateral damage. That's not an oops while you're trying to get to 30,000 Hamas fighters. That's not war as hell. What do you expect? That is, at the very least, ethnic cleansing. And even if I didn't have a bigger problem with my country backing an apartheid state, I'd certainly have a problem with it providing 2,000-pound bombs and diplomatic cover while it carries out crimes reminiscent of what Slobodan Milosevic did in Kosovo and Bosnia. And now I'm curious to hear from Destiny about why he disagrees.
Thank you very much for that opening. And we're going to kick it over to Stephen Indeed. Want to say, folks, if it's your first time here, I'm Dr. James Coons. I'm your host. We appreciate you being with us at Modern Day Debate. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, whether you're watching here or at Stephen's channel watching live. With that, we're going to kick it over to Stephen. Thanks for being with us. The floor is all yours.
Yeah, I imagine a lot of this conversation is probably going to come down to disagreeing over actual facts of the matters about any of the claims that are usually levied towards Israel or Israel's treatment of Palestinians inside or outside of Israel. In terms of why the United States should support Israel, I think there are a host of good reasons. I think that Israel is a good trading partner for the United States. I think that Israel is, for all of its faults, of which there are a number to point at, I think that Israel is a beacon of democracy in the Middle East compared to every single surrounding country, very easily. I think that the standards of living that people in Israel, including the Palestinian citizens of Israel, enjoy, and Israel's adherence to things like rule of law, I think make it a special country in the Middle East. And I think that these are ideas and things that are worth championing for the United States. I think that Israel as an ally in the Middle East provides like a level of stability to that region, and it provides a good military entry point to the United States. It's good access from the Mediterranean to host ships, host I guess whatever else we would need to from that country. Hopefully, nothing major in the future. But I think that Israel is also a key strategic ally in terms of intelligence that they collect on U.S. enemies, especially Iran. And I think that Israel probably serves as a good partner for countries like the United States in conjunction with Saudi Arabia against the Iranian axis of Iran and Syria and kind of Iraq. I think that if you care about rights of Palestinians that exist in Israel, I think that it's even more important for the United States to be seen as an ally for Israel, because I think that the United States has been an important partner historically for Israel to push them towards peaceful settlements of issues. Without the United States as a partner, I don't know if Israel would have the same motivations to even consider moving in those directions. I think that the United States also provides an important restriction on Israeli military actions. For some reason, people seem to repeat the rumor that they feel like Israel's army is not conducting itself in a way that's adherent to any rules of law. If you think that, you only have to look to the north, to the east, or to the south to see that there are far, far, far worse ways to conduct war that is probably standard for the region. And Israel very clearly operates far above and beyond any of the norms set by any of its neighbors, including the ones that they're fighting right now. And I think that without any kind of alliance with the United States, I think that I think that Israel would conduct itself probably in a far harsher manner, and I think it would be worse towards everybody in the region, anybody that you'd want to protect. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks very much for that opening as well. We're going to jump into the open dialogue. Folks, if you happen to have a question, you can submit it if you at me in the Modern Day Debate live chat. If you do a super chat, that pushes your question to the top of the list. And for this gentleman, shooting for roughly equal time. So if you can do me a favor, keep in mind that the other person will want to speak approximately the same amount as you. And with that, we're going to let you guys kick it off. The floor is all yours for open dialogue.
Yeah, so I basically heard three kinds of reasons there. One is broadly pragmatic reasons that trading partner intelligence, and one is frankly what sounded to me like a lot of whataboutism, that Israel, as bad as it might be, is at least better than other countries in the region or in other places. And then the third was in between, which was the leverage argument that if the United States weren't providing financial and military assistance and diplomatic cover to Israel, then it would act even worse. And I think that last one gets us to why I actually don't know that I agree that the disagreement is going to boil down to sort of fine-grained questions about the fact of the matter rather than inferences and underlying principles. Because it seemed to me that if, I don't know, China were sending massive amounts of military hardware to Russia for the war in Ukraine, and sometimes half-heartedly pushed Russia toward moderating some of their crimes or accepting temporary ceasefire details with Ukrainians, as a Chinese dissident, I don't think you would say that, yep, they should keep sending Russia giant bombs to drop on Ukrainian cities because they lose leverage with Russia if they didn't do that, right? And it also seems, next thing I'd say before throwing it back, that that on that on that general topic, even on a pragmatic level, it seems very implausible that Israel would be as able to hold out for as long as it has away from withdrawing to its 1967 borders if it didn't have this colossus in its corner providing it with military assistance, providing it with that UN Security Council. It does seem very plausible to me that that would that taking that away would make Israel less bold in what it does. But even if it doesn't, even if we can't stop Israel from doing a lot of what it does, then it still seems to me that it's better to at least not help them to commit these atrocities.
Okay, so I guess just two quick things. I really don't like comparisons for Israel-Palestine to other regions of the world because there are so many things that are disanalogous that it makes it difficult for any comparisons to hold any weight. So when we talk as a Chinese citizen for China supporting Russia, and then for Russia to, like, how would we feel as a Chinese person if we thought that China was holding Russia back, but they were still sending them weapons? It's hard to imagine that because Russia is the most aggressive player, like, in that entire region. So it's hard to compare them. Like, if Russia was surrounded by a bunch of far more terrible Russias, then maybe that argument would hold water. But the fact that Russia is, like, uniquely acting in a territorially aggressive way in Europe right now makes it a hard point of comparison to Israel and Palestine is the first thing. And then the second thing, for without support, like, Israel would withdraw to the 67 borders, that military allies or whatever. That's a hard argument considering that we just said we weren't going to engage in whataboutism. But I mean, I would remind the audience that Israel conquered through those 67 borders without really having any foreign allies. So the idea that without foreign allies they would be pushed back, I guess it's possible. But I mean, they are a nuclear power. I don't know if that would be the case. To run down the three different reasons that we gave, I just want to make sure that we're, like, living in the same world here. On the first thing, so we mentioned pragmatic reasons. You brought up the term whataboutism, and then we used the leverage argument. For the first thing, do we agree that there are pragmatic reasons for the United States to be allies with Israel? So pragmatic reasons might be things like they're good trading partners. There's some geostrategic advantage in having, like, a harbor for the Mediterranean, gives us access to the Middle East militarily. Do we agree that those pragmatic reasons exist and are real?
I think that there could be some pragmatic reasons like that are real, although I also think that the United States probably loses a lot from its deeply entrenched alliance with a country that outrages an awful lot of the world an awful lot of the time, particularly in the Middle East. But I'm honestly less interested in that one way or the other than I am in the general question of whether it's good to provide support to an apartheid state. And I know that you're going to disagree with that characterization, but I mean, I kind of laid out the case earlier
we'll get there.
for why the shoe fits. That B is engaged in absolutely massive destruction and displacement against its internal non-citizen population. I think that even if that turned out to be something that that had more pragmatic pluses or minuses from a pure national self-interest perspective, which I'm not actually sure that it does. But even if it did, that still seems like something that people of conscience should be against.
Okay, so I'm just going to return to the first thing for the pragmatic reasons. Do we then agree? Not like there could be, but there are pragmatic. I think we either have to agree here, or we can argue this particular point. Do we agree, for instance, do we trade with Israel? Do we get, like, military intelligence from Israel? Are these things that we factually agree on, or do we disagree here? Or
I think that those are both true, but I also think continuing down that would be pretty unproductive because remember that what I just said is that while I'm not sure that the pluses outweigh the minuses overall, that's not actually, I think, the ultimate source of the disagreement, because if we went over all the pluses in excruciating detail and all the minuses pragmatically in excruciating detail, where we would still be left with at the end of all of that is, okay, if it's pragmatically good for the sake of argument, from the perspective of pure national self-interest, is this something that means that we should just sort of swallow all of the obvious moral objections to doing that, or do those objections still hold water?
Sure. So Nazi Germany could have been a good trading partner for the United States. I'm not saying that just because we trade with them, it necessarily means that, well, now you have to accept my argument. You could accept, for sake of argument, that, yeah, there are pragmatic reasons to be allied with Israel, but there are other issues that we have with the country that far outweigh any pragmatic gain. And maybe even down the road, maybe those become unpragmatic because of how much those, like, moral crimes, I guess, weigh against us and our support for them in the region, etc. I'm just trying to make sure we're, like, in the same universe right now in terms of like what we agree on. Do we agree, for instance, that we do trade with Israel, that we export things to Israel and Israel buys them from us? Do we agree that there are like concrete military things that we get, like missile data or intelligence in Iran? Do we agree that these are things that we get from Israel? There are pragmatic reasons to be aligned with Israel. Do we agree just in that one arena? It doesn't mean that that's it. That's the whole argument. There's pragmatic reasons, so we have to do it. But do we just agree that these things exist?
Again, I've got to say this is a really strange thing to press down on, because I didn't make the slightest objection to any of that earlier, and I think I explained why I don't think that would matter if the pluses outweigh the minuses, and I also think that we're not probably in a great position to figure out if the pluses outweigh the minuses. To me, that's much less clear than the calculus about justice. But sure, do those particular pluses exist? Yes. Okay. Yes, they do.
So to macro out a little bit, when I have conversations on this topic, there's a lot of whack-a-mole that goes on, or there's a lot of hopping between a ton of different things, and it's hard for people to actually agree like on any actual substance of reality of like what has happened. I'm just trying to hammer down these points so that we have some foundation of agreement. We could agree, we could have an agreement on the next two questions that I have, which is about the three things you brought up. We could agree on all three of those things and still disagree on conclusions. I'm just trying to say that we're in the same world descriptively, reality. That's all I'm trying to do right now. There's no setup for a gotcha. There's no like, well, since you agreed with this, you have to agree with this. It's merely just saying that we like have the same factual foundation. So we do agree that there are pragmatic reasons to be aligned with Israel. There might be other reasons why we shouldn't be, but we agree that those pragmatic reasons exist, right?
Yes, I agree that we trade with Israel. I'm sure that there's military intelligence from Israel. I've never heard anybody deny either of those things.
Okay, that's good. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So the second point that you brought up, you called it whataboutism, but it has to do with Israel being better than other places. Do you disagree with the fact that Israel is generally better in almost every measurable way compared to basically every other country in the Middle East when it comes to freedom, equal rights, democratic representation of people, standards of living, LGBT stuff, whatever? Or do you disagree with that? Do you think that other countries in this region can make a stronger claim to those things when it comes to the rights that the people are afforded or the representation of those people?
I don't think it matters. I think that the question, and this actually gets us back to, since I really do not want to get lost in this, right? This gets back to something you said a minute ago, where you said, "Oh, I don't really like comparing Israel to what's going on with Israel-Palestine to anything that's going on in other regions of the world, because of course there are lots of differences between regions." Like, yeah, of course there are going to be lots of differences between regions, but I think if you're thinking about general principles and you want to make sure that you're being consistent, you absolutely have to be willing to do those comparisons. So, to directly answer your question, look, I think if you're an Israeli citizen, I think that they are, you all do have more democratic rights than citizens, of various completely non-democratic Middle Eastern countries. I think that if you are a Palestinian living under Israeli occupation, in many ways you probably have less rights than a lot of people do in some of those countries. But I also think that if that's the thing that we're arguing about, we're not actually arguing about what matters, because it could be true that literally every single person in Israel has more rights than every single person in some list of countries, which you think are the only countries that we should bring up when we're thinking about Israel-Palestine because they're close to it. And it could nevertheless be true that the treatment of millions of Palestinians for the last 57 years does fall under any reasonable definition of apartheid, and that it is very, very bad, even in general, that we're aligned with this country. Never mind that we're aligned with this country right now at a time when it's carried out this systematic campaign of destruction of the conditions of normal life in Gaza, and it's displaced literally millions of people.
Okay, I agree that these can all be problems that can supersede any of the agreements that we have here. Again, to reiterate, I'm just trying to make sure that we live in the same world with the same reality. That's the only reason I'm trying to iron out these ground questions so that we don't hop back to them later and that we can build on whatever arguments we both have from here. When I said before, I don't like comparing Israel-Palestine to other regions, or to other conflicts, it's because the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is really unique. So when somebody says, well, would you allow this country to do that thing, and they invoke other countries with very dissimilar circumstances, I feel like there is a whole bunch of like moral baggage that's being carried along from the other examples. And that's why I don't tend to like to compare those things. You would have to change those examples to make it like more morally analogous. That's why I don't typically like comparing this conflict to other conflicts. But when somebody says something like, you said that it was whataboutism, that Israel is better than other countries, well, I can compare directly the standards of living or the freedoms enjoyed by Israeli citizens, both Jewish and Palestinian, to other countries in the region. And sometimes I feel like people are either not completely honest, or they don't want to say that, or they don't want to admit that because they think it's like ceding some other part of the argument. I would submit that it is incredibly clear that the citizens of Israel, whether you're Palestinian or Jewish, enjoy much greater freedoms, much greater rights, much greater economic opportunity, much greater educational opportunity, basically in almost every single conceivable way, setting aside the people in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip at the moment, than any other Arab in any other surrounding country. I feel like that's like almost impossible to contest, but it seems hard for people to give that. I'm just curious if you feel the same, or if you feel like you can also say that like, well, sure, I guess that's true, but it's not really relevant to any of the arguments you're about to make. That's fine as well. But I'm just curious if you agree with that or disagree with that, or.
Yeah. So again, if the question is about comparison, and it's really important that we sort of keep track of the boundaries you put on this comparison, because I think all the action is going to be on the other side of those boundaries. So if we're comparing, sure, standard of living, rights, freedoms of Israeli citizens, Jewish or Palestinian, to people in just the countries that you're willing to compare them to. Yes.
So to be clear, those are countries
sure.
in the region, is what I'm saying.
Well, hold on though, right? Like I do want to, because you said a bunch of things. I want to make sure none of them get lost, right? So because that is like a much bigger disagreement that we're having here, whether only other countries in the Middle East get to be relevant. And I think that's a good way of not applying consistent standards, to only take into account other countries in the Middle East. But yes, if we're only going to count other Middle Eastern countries, and we're only interested in Israeli citizens, then I think all of that is broadly true. I mean, this is, and I don't think that's a concession. I think that's just a separate point.
Yeah, none of these are concessions, by the way. I'm just seeing if we agree on these points. That's it. Yeah.
Sure. I'm just trying to make sure people can track like how this relates to the original argument, right? Because this is a super common talking point, essentially the what about the Israeli Arabs argument against the kind of critique of Israel that I laid out earlier. And whereas if you stop just comparing the Palestinian citizens of Israel to only people who live in various dictatorships and monarchies nearby, and start comparing them to people, to minority groups in Western democracies, I think in many ways you do see significantly more, discrimination in the Israeli case. And we can certainly talk about that, but I think that that's a little bit beside the main point, because the two things that I said earlier, right, that I think that the reasons why I'm bothered by our country supporting Israel are the charge of apartheid and the charge of ethnic cleansing in the last 9 months in Gaza. And of course, neither of those are about the Israeli Arabs, right? Those are about Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza for the first one, and mostly Palestinians in Gaza for the second one. And it's true, right, that there is this population of Palestinian families who ended up on the Israeli side of the line after 1948, who were eventually, granted most of the same rights as Israeli Jews. But it doesn't follow from that, and I know you're not saying it is, but I really just want this to be clear for the larger point, right? It doesn't follow from those people not having been denied these rights on the basis of their ethnicity, that there aren't millions of other people in Greater Israel, right? Israel's existed since 1967, who are denied basic legal rights on the basis of their ethnicity, quite openly, on the grounds that even while Israel is building cities full of its own citizens in there, even while a significant percentage of the Israeli Jewish population is moving there, very explicitly on the grounds that if we granted all of these people citizenship, then that would take away the Jewish character of the state. So we can't do that. So to my mind, this is a little bit like saying, yeah, you could vote if you were a Black person in New York State in 1940, therefore, no one in the United States in 1940 was denied the right to vote because they were Black. I mean, there are people who have these rights in Israel despite being Arab, but there are also millions of people who are denied these rights because they're Arab.
Okay, so to be clear, there is no such thing as denying their rights because of their race in Israel. We earlier said that there are some 2 million Palestinian, like I think 20% of Israel's population in Israel proper are Palestinian Israeli citizens. Their ethnicity does not factor in here to their rights that are afforded to them. People that have rights in the West Bank or don't have rights in the West Bank, that is determined upon citizenship lines. And if you are an Israeli citizen, you're granted more rights, obviously, because you're a citizen. If you are a resident or non-citizen, you are granted less rights. Now, as to the the occupation, whether that's good or bad, or whether there are issues there, is a separate conversation. Obviously, there are issues. Obviously, this is a situation you don't want going on for a long period of time. But I think it's important, especially for arguments we're going to do later, to note that the claim that rights are doled out based on your ethnicity is simply not true. That's the one part there. You said that it's not fair to compare them to minority groups, it's not fair to compare them to other people in the region, but we should compare them to minority groups in Western democracies. I think that when you're making any comparison on anything, you're always looking for the most like things to compare them to. Israel is a country that very much exists in the Middle East, and that goes along with everything else that is part and parcel of being in the Middle East, including the ways that your neighbors do combat against you, the ways that their governments run, the ways that they engage with you. The idea that we would compare Israel to standards that exist in Western democracies that aren't threatened by neighbors, that aren't under constant attack, that don't have to deal with the same issues that Israel deals with is a little bit naive. I think it's an unfair projection of a Western projection of how we think a country should look to analyze Israel in that way. I think is a little silly. I can justify that later if we get into that. Okay, so going back to these.
Yeah.
Wait, hold on. Okay, wait, because you're talking so much. We can do this simpler, but I'm just trying to. It feels like you're trying to head off like every potential argument. I'm not even on the road to making an argument. I'm just trying to agree. When I gave my opening argument, you said that you could group my arguments into 3 broad categories. So I'm just seeing that we have a factual agreement on 3 broad categories. The first one was the pragmatic reasons. We seem to agree. The second one was that the Israeli citizens seem to enjoy more rights than other people in their region. Maybe not to Western countries. We seem to agree on that. And then the third argument you said was the leverage argument. Do you agree that the West has historically and currently provides leverage against actions that Israel might otherwise take if the West wasn't providing that leverage?
Okay, so I want to start out with the first 2 things you said, because I think they're really important. So one, you said that I was saying it wasn't fair to compare Israel to other states in the Middle East. That's not true. That's not what I said. I said that we shouldn't artificially restrict the comparison to other states in the Middle East. I think everywhere is fair grounds for comparison, although I think there's also some irony to saying that it's not reasonable to compare Israel to Western countries, because you should compare it to what it's most like, when of course Israel's self-conception and the conception of it that's pushed by its apologists in the West is very much that it should be thought of as the same sort of entity as normal Western democracies. But my view is that you should be willing to compare it to any other country. If you have this scale of how many, of what rights are denied to what people, for what reasons, how objectionable this is, I think just coming in ahead on that scale of various monarchies, military dictatorships, is not good enough to make it not troubling that the United States is supporting this country if it is troublingly worse than normal Western democracies in some of these respects, right? So that's one point. The other point that you said right at the beginning when you started speaking just now is that you said that nobody is denied the right. Nobody is denied rights in Israel because, you used the word race. I think I said ethnicity, but whatever, because they're demographics. Whether they're Jewish or they're part of some other group. And you used as evidence of that the fact that there are these 2 million Palestinian citizens of Israel who aren't denied that. But this is my point about how this is like saying that because Black people were allowed to vote in New York State in 1940. Therefore, it's not true that nobody in the United States in 1940 was denied the right to vote because they're Black. Like you say, oh, this is about citizenship, so it's not about ethnicity, it's about citizenship. But my point is precisely that even as the West Bank in particular, Gaza is more complicated, although I think actually much worse in some ways. But even as the West Bank in particular was more and more integrated into the state in lots of ways, that, again, 5 to 10% of the Israeli Jewish population lives there. This is treated for all sorts of purposes as being part of Israel. Nevertheless, millions of people there were not made citizens. And, Israeli politicians and Western Zionists typically are not shy about explaining the reason they could not have been made citizens, which is, oh, if we had made those people citizens, then there would have been too many people with the wrong ethnic group who were citizens of Israel, and we'd lose the Jewish character of the state. This is the argument that this is like, I have yet to meet the Zionist who's not 100% transparent about making that argument. So saying it's about citizenship, not ethnicity, I think kind of elides the issue that people are denied citizenship, even as the land they lived in is for every other practical purpose absorbed into Israel, precisely because of their ethnicity. On the three broad arguments you made for yes, real quickly, I know I've been talking for a while, I'll just say that on the pragmatic point, I don't know that we agree. I mean, my position was yes, of course. If you say, does the U.S. trade with Israel? Does the U.S. get military intelligence from Israel? Again, I've never heard anybody deny either of those two things. But if the question is overall, does the alliance between the U.S. and Israel, sort of do more good than harm for the U.S.? I think that's much harder to know. Although, again, I'm much more interested in the questions of that alliance perpetuating fundamental injustices. And then finally, because you asked me a direct question on leverage, I think that, you can find individual instances, certainly, of the U.S. Using leverage to moderate Israeli behavior. There's the famous incident about Ronald Reagan during the war in Lebanon, for example. But overall, is Israel more emboldened than not by having the most powerful country in the world give it a blank check of assistance, so that even questioning whether it's always going to provide that assistance is like a huge political third rail, and providing that sort of stable UN Security Council veto on its behalf? It does seem a bit implausible to me that having those things in place wouldn't make the Israelis bolder about picking fights with other people than they would if they did not have those things in their favor.
Did they have the UN Security Council votes in their favor when they took all of the land in 67? Or did they have any security guarantees from the West when they took all the land in 67?
Well, this is the, I think that whether there was, that is the time that relationship is just really getting going. But if the idea is, okay, they were powerful enough to do this, or bold enough to do this without those things in their favor, I've got to say that seems like it would strengthen my point, not weaken it, because if they started out right already having enough of an edge over their neighbors and certainly over the powerless and dispossessed Palestinians, that they were able to do these things way back in 1967. Then,
I'm just saying that I guess my argument is just that in 67, they seem to in 67, it seemed like they were emboldened to take so much territory, including the Sinai Peninsula. And it was, Carter's commitment to peace, and him forcing Begin to actually take Sadat seriously, that Israel actually ended up giving back the Sinai for peace with Egypt. So it's hard to make historical counterfactuals, but if I look at the actual historical record, it seems like without US support, you've got big expansion in 48, you've got big expansion in 67, And then with U.S. support, you've got Israeli shrinkage. They give back the peninsula. You've got peace with the country. So I don't know where this idea comes from that international support emboldens Israel to be more aggressive than it actually is, when it seems like Israel's most aggressive, most expansionist years were done when they had absolutely no international support whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I do find that a little bit confusing, because I would think that your claim here, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, is that you think that Israel was under such grave threat in 1967 that they had, that they had no choice but to do that, right? And
I do think that. Do you disagree with that, or do you think that's not true?
I think that it's. I'm not convinced that it is, but I also think that it's probably not worth litigating, because I think that that whether or not that's true has very little to do with the objections that I was making earlier. I think that this is a sort of fundamental disagreement, right? You said earlier that one of your reasons for thinking that it's bad, or it's misleading to compare the standards that we would apply to Israel-Palestine to the standards that we would apply to any other situation around the world, is that the history is different, and so that and that makes a moral difference. And my sense of the way things often go is you get a lot of very in the weeds discussion of the history, but I guess the bigger question I would just ask is, why does that make a moral difference?
Well, I think it makes a moral difference because we were arguing this third point about leverage, and you seem to make the argument that Israel, with U.S. backing, seems to be more reckless or more territorially aggressive than when Israel is without that support. That if we were to pull back that support, my counter argument is that if we withdraw support, well, then Israel has no reason whatsoever to acquiesce to any desires of the United States. And then when we consult the historical record, Israel's biggest years of expansion, which were 1947 and 8, and then it was 1947 and 8, and then 1967 seems to be when it had its back against the wall with absolutely no support internationally. But as support internationally grew, not only did they stop conquering territory, they seemed to give back territory in the form of the Sinai Peninsula. So I'm curious how we can make the argument. What is the argument that Israel has more aggressive means just because they're backed by the United States? I can't find an example of that in history. So how am I to believe your argument there?
Yeah. So I think that the first that the example in history is the fact that Israel has been able to hold on to this territory from 1967 for the last 57 years, even as the vast majority of the world is opposed to it. It does actually seem pretty plausible that, just as you say that the United States gets things out of trade or military intelligence from Israel, that Israel gets all sorts of benefits from not being completely internationally isolated, and that if that were a real danger, that would be a factor in the calculations. I also think that there's some tension in how you're talking about 1967, because on the one hand, for the purposes of this argument, you want to use it as an example of Israel being emboldened because there was no moderating force. And on the other hand, you want to say that they were under such grave threat that they had no choice but to do that. And it seems to me that if you take seriously the idea that they were under such grave threat that they had no choice but to do that, it's not actually very good evidence that they were emboldened, in a way that they wouldn't have been if they'd had moderating pressures.
Well, but that was the entire reason why they took the territory that they did, because they felt like they were under grave threat. The Golan Heights were captured because they felt that Syrian artillery could strike into Haifa and Tel Aviv too easily. The West Bank was captured because of Jordanian attacks from East Jerusalem into Jerusalem proper, and because they also had 10 miles from their hills to fire into Tel Aviv. And the Sinai Peninsula was taken because once Nasser ejected all of the UN peacekeeping forces and started to deploy his military across the Sinai, Israel felt like they couldn't fight any attrition-based wars against countries that had 10x the population. occupations. So in all three examples of the territory captured in 67, they were done explicitly because Israel felt like they had their back to the wall. And I think this is further evidenced by the fact that Israel only gave back the Sinai when Egypt gave them a peace treaty. So I think that it perfectly backs my argument up. I don't see any reason. Again, I'm returning to, you keep saying that Israel's held territory because of help from the rest of the world. I don't recall much help in the first or second Lebanon war. I don't recall much help in the 48 or 67 war. I know that the U.S. replaced a lot of armor in 73 for Yom Kippur. In 56, the United States was a moderating force during the Suez War. Basically, I think Eisenhower told Israel to fuck off and leave, which they did. So I don't see any part, returning once again, I just don't see any evidence or any examples. Can you think of moments where Israeli military acted in such a way where they're like, oh, well, the U.S. is helping us here, in Lebanon, either in 2006 or in the 80s, or the United States, or somebody's helping us here fight. I just don't think that this really happens. I don't think it's much of a factor in any of the Israeli history. I think that if anything, Israel is generally fighting with the United States, and the United States is trying to push Israel towards more peaceful things, if for no other reason, because it hurts our other allies in the region, and it hurts our relationship with those allies, whether this is example or evidenced by Carter pushing back into peace with Sadat, or whether it's evidenced by Clinton trying so hard to get peace, between Israel with Arafat. I think he was at the Oslo signing, right? I think it's him in the picture. It feels like I just don't see any evidence for. I hear this claim over and over again that Israel is emboldened. I just don't see any evidence of that whatsoever.
Yeah,
I don't know, what's an example of that?
So, well, okay. I did give you one. You didn't accept it, but I also just want to make sure.
Oh wait, what was the example? I'm sorry if I forgot.
But first, I just want to make sure that everybody kind of gets the order of the arguments here, because I pointed out that there seems to be this tension in how you're talking about 1967. On the one hand, you want to use it as evidence that Israel was more emboldened to be aggressive when it didn't have like moderating U.S. alliance. And on the other hand, you want to say, actually, they had no choice but to do what they did because they were under such grave threat. And when I pointed that out, instead of responding by showing how those two things could both be true, you just gave me an argument in favor of the idea that Israel had no choice because they were under such grave threat. But I mean, again,
wait, can you tell me what is the tension, or what were the 2 points?
Yeah,
they had
sure.
no choice.
So the two things are, one, that 1967, Israel seizing all that territory, is evidence that they were more emboldened to act aggressively, when they didn't have a strong relationship with the U.S. And on the other hand, you want to say that actually it's not that they were like boldly and recklessly acting aggressively, it's that they had absolutely no choice but to do what they did.
Yeah, but my argument is the reason why they acted aggressively is because they had no support in the West. That Israel, there's so much, from Ben Gurion to Moshe Dayan to all these old prime ministers talking about the rib cage of Tel Aviv, that there was some, 15 kilometers or whatever between the ocean and the West Bank. And Israel felt like without any security assurances from the West, the only people that could ensure their security were themselves. And this came at the cost of great territorial expansion. I don't understand how there's tension. I think both of these points play into each other perfectly. That if Israel had security guarantees from the West, then maybe they would have felt more comfortable saying like, oh, okay, well, we don't need to go invade our neighbors. We don't need to take any land here. Like, we know that the West will protect us if we get attacked.
Okay. I mean, it seemed to me that it's not really an instance of Israel, being emboldened to be aggressive if it was something that was defensive and that they had to do. I'd also point out that, during, not just now, but the time you spoke before that, you brought up 1956, where it seemed like Eisenhower was in fact able to exert influence, without it being the case that that the U.S. was sending regular shipments of bombs and money to Israel and exercising a routine Security Council veto on its behalf. But
the whole reason why Israel listened to Eisenhower is because they wanted those security assurances. The whole reason that 56 war started is because Israel thought that they could get in good with Britain and France, who basically faked the reason to start that war. That's the whole reason why Israel was so eager to join. And Israel's going to listen to the United States because they hope for an alliance in the future. But again, the only reason there was a moderating force there, even if it wasn't because of current arms shipment, is because of the hope of future arms shipments. That was the whole idea of essentially bowing to the United States. Otherwise, why would they? Well, it's not like the US is helping them. So if Eisenhower tells them to fuck off, why would they care or otherwise, if not to try to gain some kind of future alliance with them.
Well, but the picture you're painting here is that Israel is doing what the United States wants, because if it does, it thinks that it might get some military help. And if it doesn't, it won't get that help, which of course is a very different situation from there just being this blank check of constant support, where you have, again, it's so entrenched that Israel gets tons of help every year, no matter
Well,
what.
I don't know how this responds to it. For 67, I
Sure.
think that Israel has no security assurances from the West.
Mhm.
Therefore, they have to act more aggressively to guarantee their own security. Do you agree then that there's no tension between these 2 points, as you were saying before, or do you still believe there's tension between these 2 points?
I think that it is a little odd to say that this, that Israel was willing to. I mean, I guess I'm not sure how worth splitting the hair finer this particular hair is, but I suppose it depends on what you mean by act aggressively. But like, again, I think that this is, just think about where we started and think about where we are right now in the conversation, right? So earlier, I said, here are some really big picture reasons to think that it's objectionable that the United States is supporting this country in general and especially right now. And then one of your reasons to think that it's actually good in any case is that the United States can exert leverage. And I started to ask, okay, but is this is that leverage, right? Is that something we would accept, right? In general, if a country is doing wildly objectionable things, is denying lots of people fundamental rights, is engaged in ethnic cleansing, is that something that we would generally say, oh no, but it's still good for a superpower patron to support it? Because at least they'll have some leverage to act as a moderating influence.
I mean, I think if that's your position, that you can just literally agree with all of these, and we just skip to that part of the conversation. The reason why I have to have these micro things is because, in my opinion, this particular conflict is built on more misinformation than I've seen on like any historical event ever in my entire life. And if it's not you if a person is to build off of bad history or bad geopolitical understanding, all of these different micro events, well, then the macro event is essentially begged. Like we know, like, oh, well, if this fact is true and this fact is true, if Israel conquers no matter what, if leverage doesn't do anything, if they're not even valuable, blah, 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 well, then of course, like all these other things are obviously horrible. So I think
the reason that I didn't see that it's true is that I'm not convinced that it's empirically true that the moderating leverage that the US can exert balances out the fact that Israel manages to escape from the kind of international isolation it might otherwise face, because the most important country in the world gives it this level of support. I'm not convinced by that, but also,
that's
again,
fine. Just real quick, you can not be convinced by that. That's fine, but you've given absolutely no argument to support that. I've given historical counterexamples on multiple different points here. So I mean, you can say that you don't agree with that. That's fine, but like it's purely off of vibes, unless you can give me like any historical or any example whatsoever.
Okay. But at the very beginning of our talking about this, I did say, look, I think that the fact that Israel has felt willing to hold on to the West Bank and Gaza for 57 years is pretty good evidence that it benefits from having the 300-pound gorilla in all of this, the United States, give it unconditional.
Can you give me an example? How does the United States help Israel hold on to the West Bank?
Well, beyond the fact that it gives it military aid and financial assistance, with loan guarantees, which definitely reduces the pain domestically of doing that. Presumably, Israel wouldn't want to be a rogue state in the international system, to be completely bereft of allies and supporters, and trading partners, perhaps. You mentioned that earlier.
So every single action that they take then, because the United States provides some level of military assistance, we're going to say is because the United States provides military assistance, despite the fact that they
I don't think that's what I said. I think I said that that the specific fact that they felt the ability to thumb their nose at the overwhelming majority of the world, which says that they want them to get out of these territories for 57 years.
Well, because the majority of the territories have
pretty good evidence.
It's not good evidence at all, though. The majority of the territories that are surrounding Israel also thumbed their nose at the international community for even longer, right? So why would it be a surprise? Again, unless you take this exceptional view.
What would be the equivalent act of nose thumbing? I mean, I'm not sure it matters, but I'm curious what you have in mind.
The equivalent act of nose thumbing, the occupation of the West Bank by Israel to the rest of the world, I would say would probably be the occupation of the West Bank by Jordan for 20 years. They didn't care.
Okay, so that's even if it was the case that that was an equivalent act of nose thumbing, right? That there was as much international opposition to that for those 20 years as there.
Wait, what do you mean? If there was there not opposition to it? There was a General Assembly resolution 181 that was voted on in 47 that the Arab states refused, and then there was a war that happened afterwards. After 67, people like to quote Resolution 242 that says territories acquired through combat can't be maintained, and that's how Jordan acquired the West Bank. There was a king, Abdullah I, I believe, was literally assassinated in Jerusalem because of how angry some of the Palestinians were that Jordan had occupied that territory. So, I mean, there was some condemnation for it. I mean, internationally, I don't know if we cared as much because there were other things going on, but I mean, it seems like
you just made my point, right? That there wasn't the same level, but even if there was, right? I would say that 20 years is 37 years less long than 57 years. Also, of course, if we were going to see how it's relevant to this point, we would have to see is it the case that Jordan continued to enjoy good relations with Western countries it wanted to have good relationships with for those 20 years, because if that is the case, then I don't really see the relevance of this to undermining the idea that escaping international isolation is good for Israel and diminishes the pressure on Israel to sort of bow to the will of the international community.
Well, I think the difference is, and this is the point, this is why I said I don't like comparing Israel to Western countries. None of these surrounding countries have to bow to international pressure. Who cares?
Okay. So is that a good thing?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So again, I mean, this is why that, I mean, I know you didn't like the word earlier, right? But I mean, this is why I think, whataboutism is a relevant term to use here.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. So whataboutism is used to escape.
If the Jordanian occupation of the West Bank were still a thing, then we could have a discussion about whether the United States should be supporting Jordan while it was occupying the West Bank. But just and I think all of this would, I think that discussion would play out, much the same way. Whether, I mean, if you're like, is the claim that if there were more consequences for Jordan?
Yes, that is the claim, yes. So the whataboutism doesn't work as an argument. Whataboutism is when you're trying to avoid responsibility by a particular party by bringing up some disanalogous thing in some other party and like appealing to hypocrisy or something when you're trying to hold a particular standard somewhere.
It doesn't have to be
disanalogous. If I shoot and kill somebody, and somebody's like, wow, you just killed a person. And I'm like, wait, this person was pointing a gun at me saying they were going to kill me. And you're like, whataboutism. No, that's not whataboutism. That doesn't count.
What I just said.
Right? When Israel is existing in a particular region where there are a whole bunch of actors that are essentially allowed to operate freely in particular ways, whether that means using chemical weapons against their populations, like it had meant for a while in Libya, like it means up in like it meant for a little bit in Iraq, like it means up in Syria, whether that means allowing massive amounts of people, including children, to starve to death, like that might mean in the country of Yemen, like that might mean against opponents for Saudi Arabia that led that coalition against Yemen, whether that might mean massive disenfranchisement of citizens, of throwing them into torture chambers, like that means in Iraq, in Iran, in Lebanon, especially southern Lebanon, or like we can go on and on. I'm just saying that like when all of these countries,
but none of it would be relevant in any way.
That's great. Okay. When we can go around and we can see how all of the particular actors in this region are acting, right? The actions that you take in a particular region, especially if you don't have security guarantees from the West, are probably to some extent going to have to be in the same language as the actors that are in the region that you're operating in, which is why I don't like to compare like, oh, well, in an ideal democratic world, you know, surrounded by two oceans, what would the United States do? Well, it's a lot different in terms of like, well, what can Israel do? Because they have neighbors that are willing to play by an entirely different set of rules that the United Nations of the rest of the world doesn't hold them to account on. And I think that we have to evaluate that when we figure out like how Israel's going to act, returning us, I guess, to that point of like, why does Israel, if they feel threatened, why does that mean that they take more territory? Well, because holding territory is literally the only way that they can create a buffer between them and their most exposed areas and their feeling, because they don't have those security guarantees from the West, and because the entire region thumbs their nose at UN resolutions. That's the issue.
Yeah. So again, you started out saying that, well, one thing that was wrong but not very important, which is that whataboutism has to involve bringing up disanalogous actions. It can actually be involved bringing up perfectly analogous actions, and it's nevertheless whataboutism. If I shoot somebody and then you say, oh, but this other guy across town shot somebody and they got away with it, so therefore I should get away with it, right? That's exactly the kind of thing that whataboutism was coined to describe. Now, you said this isn't like that, because what it's like is you shot somebody but they had a gun pointed at you, but then you proceeded to invoke an awful lot of examples that don't involve a gun pointed at Israel. They involve terrible things being done to other people that don't threaten Israel in any way. In some cases, even by countries with some level of security cooperation, or certainly at least common allies.
Okay, well then I mean, if we look then at
the question is always, right, when people bring up crimes committed by other countries in whether in the region or otherwise, that crimes not committed against Israel, right, but crimes committed against other people in discussions of crimes committed by Israel, then the question is always, okay, are you saying, well, they get away with that, so therefore Israel shouldn't shouldn't worry about international law, shouldn't worry about this? I mean, I would say that, for example, one of your examples was the Saudi war in Yemen, which was...
Okay, we don't have to get into the Saudi stuff.
Well, okay, but it was one of your examples, right? And it's worth taking at least 10 seconds on this, because...
I'll give you 10 seconds, because I want to keep everything moving quick.
Okay. Yeah, how are we doing on the overall time for this part, by the way?
Let's see. I'd say maybe another 10 minutes, and so I can give you
Okay,
like a really
for
short.
On the direct example, like we can just talk about. So 67 is obviously one of our most contentious wars, right? And you talk about like, well, the self-defense thing doesn't count. Do we agree?
No, I didn't say that. I have this is, again, I don't think anything that would be true about 1967, 1973, 1956, Sinai. I don't think any of this stuff would be relevant to, is it acceptable to rule over millions of people for 57 years without giving them equal rights because of their ethnicity? And is it acceptable for the United States to support a country like that? It is acceptable for the United States to support a country that has displaced millions of people in the last 9 months, that there could be literally anything that was true of those things. And nevertheless, the answer to both of those questions would be no, just like, to do those 10 seconds, just like, yes, it's terrible that the United States was back in Saudi Arabia during while it was committing those atrocities in Yemen. I mean, I think that the I think that the left was, almost the only people who were speaking out against that at the time. Bernie Sanders.
Okay, we're not getting into all this.
But this is the point. Just the same, applying the same standards. I'm not. Oh my God, I can't
so much time. You've talked like 3 times as much as me. I'm just trying to get like really basic.
I can't believe after taking us through obvious diversions that had absolutely nothing to do with the issues in dispute.
None of these
45 minutes.
Wait.
I do have to, because we do have limited time.
You have the gall to accuse me of stalling for time. This is the point. It's a very, very simple point about.
I happen to mute everybody, but just because we only do have really limited time, Ben, I do just want to go over to Destiny, just because, as you asked before, the Q&A is in less than 10 minutes, and so I do want to just quick kick it back over to Stephen, and then I promise, we'll kick it back to you again before, because we do have those closings that you had asked for. So, kicking it back over to Stephen. Let me just figure out how to unmute everybody. I haven't had. Let's see. Okay. Ready for you, Stephen. I think that it should have a little button that says James asked you to unmute.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure we have a similar factual foundation for the discussion. Otherwise, it's pointless. We're just like screaming into the abyss if we don't have the same like factual foundation. If you want to say like we can ignore the wars, you can't say that after you've lost the arguments on all of them and then say, well, no, it doesn't count. If you don't want to take into account anything that happened in 47, 48, 56, 67, 73, 83, like if you don't want to take into account any of these things, that's fine. Then just say like, oh, that doesn't matter. Don't try to argue them all and waste 30 minutes and then say, oh, actually, that doesn't matter. Just say like, oh, I don't care what happened in 67. Oh, okay. And by the way, that's perfectly fair. I agree with that to some extent. The history actually doesn't fucking matter that much because I think that two sides were probably never going to fucking agree on the history, which is fine. Say fuck the history. We can have only modern discussion, but don't try to argue it all and then say, well, actually, this doesn't matter. The only reason I bring it up is because the capture of territory in 67 is a pretty important central part for why people think Israel is or isn't occupying a land, or if they have a justification for doing it. The central question or not central question, but well, it is a big question. You keep saying that Israel is not allowing certain people to have citizenship just because of an ethnic reason. Why is Israel so protective of the ethnic character of the country? Why do you think that is?
Okay, I want to point out that your summary was based on either a debate that happened in your head or an earlier one that you got this one mixed up with, because you said I was arguing all the wars. I argued none of the wars. I have not made a single assertion about a single one of those wars tonight. That didn't happen. The only thing I've said about any of those wars at any point tonight, right? Go back and check. The only thing I've said is that I see some tension between bringing up 1967 as an example of Israel being more bold and aggressive without U.S. support, and also saying that everything that Israel did in 1967 was stuff that they needed to do for defensive reasons. That's a meta point. I still have trouble seeing how those two can be true. But again, I haven't made any claim about any of those wars. That's just not true. Now, on the question, I think that if what you're ultimately pointing to is Zionism, historically understandable. It's not a mystery.
Wait, can I have him answer the question instead of rambling about Zionism? I'm just asking, why does Israel care about the ethnic composition of the country? That's the question. Now you're talking about Zionism? That's the question.
That's literally the same thing, Stephen.
That's literally not, but okay.
It is literally the same thing, right? So this is again, I don't know why you're having so much trouble keeping track of this, but this is a very simple point.
Hold on, to be clear, I'm not having trouble keeping track of this. We can talk about a Jewish nation. We can talk about Theodore Herzl. We can talk about the foundational ideas of Zionism all you want. I'm asking today, because you didn't want to talk about the history, so we don't have to talk about the history. I don't care about secular Zionism. It's not even relevant to today's Israeli politics. What I'm asking is right now for today, why does Israel want to maintain the ethnic character of their country? That's it.
Yes. Again, what I was saying was that you can think that it's historically understandable where that desire would come from. I think a different way of saying that is that Zionism was historically understandable. I think those are synonymous ways of talking, but I think you can say that it's historically understandable, but nevertheless say that if millions of people are being ruled over for generations without them having citizenship and it being denied, because they're part of the wrong ethnicity. And if you added all these people with this ethnicity to the existing Israeli Arab population, then that would mean that there were, too many Arabs, versus Jews in the country. That is definitionally apartheid. That you are denying millions of people rights based on their ethnicity. And I think that, your question, oh, why do they want that? Yeah, it's completely historically understandable where this comes from.
I'm not saying historically, I'm saying today, why do they want to maintain the ethnic character of the country?
Yeah, instead of how would you answer that question?
Wait, to be clear, you don't even have a concept in your mind of why the ethnic character of the country might be important to Jews?
I think I do. I'm just really confused about why you would ask this as like, instead of just telling me why and
because if you don't know the answer to this, I want it to be.
Oh my God, yeah. Stephen, this is not
You're restating the same thing over and over again. You've wasted so much time. If you don't know why, then I just want that to be shown that you have no idea why Israel, which is funny because this is probably the most defining point of the conflict. You don't have no concept.
The idea that this is a factual question, that there's a singular correct answer to is just wrong. That's just not true. We could certainly talk about all sorts of anxieties that Israelis would have about what it would mean if they lost the majority, and we could say some of those are historically understandable but wrong. You can think that some of those might be right, but there is not a singular objectively correct answer to that any more than there was a singular objectively correct answer to why so many white South Africans feared the end of apartheid. I think that there are lots of correct partial answers, but that's not like an uncontroversial factual question.
Then why not
somebody knows the answer to, or not? What I was doing is conceding that there may be many good answers to this, but say to be completely irrelevant.
I want to give Stephen a chance to respond, and then we got to go into the closings because Ben is right.
I'll give up my whole closing. Well, I'll give up my whole closing. Keep it back and forth. Okay, so let's posit one theoretical, hyper theoretical. Maybe it's the case that the ethnic character of the country is important to Israeli people, especially Jewish ones, because they feel like if they were to live as an ethnic minority, that the history would be repeated that they'd experienced in every other part of the world, especially under Islamic caliphates, where they would be relegated to second-class citizen status, and they would be subject to pogroms or mass violence, like they had been historically. Do you think that that is, one, the anxiety of most of where that ethnic character defense comes from, and two, is that a fair anxiety to have, that might be something that would happen?
I think that that's not, again, I have been arguing about this with people for my entire adult life. Certainly, I've heard many, many people express things like that.
Let's have this be your closing, Ben, just because you're right. I did make a mistake.
In that case, let's just go to the actual closings, because I was answering a direct question. That's a very different thing from closing.
Well, yeah, let him answer that question. I just want to hear it. So, do you think that Jews have an accurate feeling that there's a lot of potential bad that could happen to them if they were to live as an ethnic minority in a Muslim majority state?
I think that that's something that lots of people think, but I actually think that overall the best bet for peace and security for everybody is multi-ethnic democracy, not having an exclusionary ethno-state. So yes, I agree that it's a widespread feeling, but no, I don't agree that actually this is what's best for people's safety and peace over time.
Can you give and then just a final question, can you give a single example of any Arab majority or Muslim majority or Persian or Turkish state that has had that multi-ethnic democracy that hasn't resulted in the mass pogroming or expulsion of its Jewish population?
I think that this goes back to what we were talking about earlier.
That's my closing statement. Okay.
Is there? Okay, well, if you know what I said, I don't know why you're asking, but I think that limiting comparisons to only the military dictatorships and monarchies that
I'm sorry. Tell me which European countries Jews lived happily under then, prior to the formation of Israel.
Why is prior to the formation of Israel the only important question? I mean, if you could ask,
because it's easy to live peacefully in a country when all your people have fled from the country.
I mean, again, I think that there are lots of European countries today where it's far safer to be Jewish than it is in Israel. I think certainly the United States today, it's infinitely safer to be Jewish in the United States than it is in Israel. And I think these are fair points of comparison. Saying that,
wait, why would it be a fair point of comparison when the United States is not an ethnically Arab majority state or a Muslim ruled majority state?
Well, again, I think that that if the question is, do you think that there's just something innate about like a Arab character that means?
I'm sorry, stop. Hold on. Nothing that I just said hold on, I'm sorry. If you can't give me a single example of an Arab majority state that had a successful Jewish population, then you are racist and you believe that Arabs are innately horrible like that. So I need one example from you, or else I need you to own that immediately, because I don't know why you would accuse me of some racial essentialism when I'm only appealing to modern countries and historical examples of countries. That weird pivot to like a racial essentialist thing, I don't think it has anything to do with race. If you want, we can dive into the whole history of every single different caliphate and of all the different Muslim countries, and I can give you reasons why I think that Jews don't work here in these particular populations. If the only thing you can conceive of is racial essentialism, then that must be your idea, unless you want to give me a competing explanation. So either give me one Muslim or Arab majority country where Jews live happily as a minority, or you need to accept that you are a racial essentialist, or you need to tell me all the reasons why it doesn't work in every single one of those particular countries.
I'll give you a chance to respond, Ben. Forgive me. It is true that I want to be fair to Ben. We have gone over the open dialogue time that was agreed on, and I know you guys have got busy schedules. So this has to be the last time that we can have an open dialogue question, and then we have to go to the Q&A. So I'll give you a chance to respond.
Well, hold on. We never did the closings.
Or closings.
We were going to do a half an hour of open discussion, and then we were going to do 5-minute closings.
That's right. What I meant to say is then the closings, then Q&A. So go ahead, Ben, and then maybe if you have like maybe a minute and a half, if you're able to, and then we'll jump into those 5-minute closings.
Sure. I think that if you have if you say that the answer is no, my question is, what's the therefore? In other words, if the answer is you don't have happy existences for Jewish people living in dictatorships, theocracies, and monarchies, therefore, if a democratic state extended equal rights to all of its Arab population, then you wouldn't have a happy existence for Jewish people within the existing state. It does seem a little confusing why that would be true, if not for some sort of essentialist reason, because if rather than having theocracies, monarchies, you had a democratic republic, but that democratic republic was majority Arab, therefore it would be the same thing. I'm confused about what the non-essentialist reason for that would be.
What is an example of an Arab or Muslim majority democratic country?
This is something, if you're able to mention it in your closing, Stephen, and then we might have a chance during the Q&A if Ben wants to sneak in a response, just because I
sure. I guess my closing is that like we didn't even really get to discuss anything. Most of the people that discuss this have like very little to no grasp whatsoever on the history or even like the modern understanding of anything that's happening in the region. It is incredibly infuriating that a part of the world that has such a rich history that's also really easily accessible. All the history here is very recent. We don't have to like dig back to, the kingdom of David to figure out what's going on. You've got media statements, you've got diaries, you've got, because Israel's a democracy, we have open archives from Israel that we can examine. There's a lot of answers to all of these questions, but the pro-Palestinian side generally just doesn't want to engage in any history because usually the history either makes them look bad or it undermines whatever current argument they're making. But even the modern understanding of what's happening in these regions is incredibly poor. The idea that we think that it is essential that all these leftists that constantly oppose regime change, we can't regime change Gaddafi, that's horrible. We can't regime change Saddam Hussein, that's horrible. We shouldn't be intervening in Syria, that's horrible. These places where you've got tortures of political opponents, where you've got the expulsion of enemy parties, the murders of journalists, where you've got the deaths of hundreds of thousands of other Arabs, none of these places are right for regime change because that would be unethical. But Israel, that's a place where, oh my God, like the apartheid, the genocide. If you ask the average person how many people have died in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they'd probably be shocked to learn that it's probably about half, of the Israeli-Arab conflict. If you add up every single war, every single massacre, every single conflict that happened between a Jewish person and an Arab person for the past 150 years, I think you're at about 1/2 to 1/3 of the total deaths of 6 years of the Syrian civil war. That doesn't include the Iraq-Iran war. That doesn't include everything that's happened in Iraq. It doesn't include the 60,000 some children that died, that starved to death in Yemen, excluding all the other deaths. It doesn't include anything that's happened in Northern Africa. It doesn't include any of those other places. It's the amount of outrage that's given to this particular region, combined with the misunderstanding of history, combined with the misunderstanding of modern day facts, combined with the misunderstanding of international law, combined with the misunderstanding of basically every single part of this conflict, is so incredibly infuriating to me. And as I hope I've demonstrated in this conversation, if you try to sit down and just have people like, can we just agree on some basic facts? People won't even admit that, like, well, would it really be bad for Jews to live in an Arab majority state? Well, I don't know. Like, that couldn't be too bad. Ask them. What Arab states do Jews live in? I think the biggest Jewish population in an Arab state, I think is like 2,500 Jews that live in like Morocco. That's the largest one. There are more Palestinian Israelis, more Arab Israelis in the country of Israel than there are Jews in every single other Arab state on the planet times like 500. It's not even close. So yeah, I don't know, man. I hope one day I'll be able to have a conversation where the person can at least begin to engage on a factual level, and then we can jump into like the philosophical part. But it's all just a bunch of like empty speech and poor application of international law and history and modern understanding of literally everything. And it's very frustrating.
We'll kick it over to Ben for his closing as well before we jump into the Q&A. Ben, the floor is yours.
Sure. So I just want to note that that started with a very strange attempt to find an inconsistency between opposing the United States going to war to impose regime change in various bad states, with some of the same anti-war people opposing the United States actively helping a apartheid state carry out widespread ethnic cleansing. And you're right that if people who oppose the war in Gaza and the U.S. role in it, we're in favor, we're out there advocating that the United States invade Israel to impose regime change, then you're right, that would be very inconsistent. But of course, nobody has done that. Right? They're like that combination of positions, as far as I know. I'm sure you can always find somebody, but as far as I know, that combination of positions doesn't exist. So that seems like a very strange attempt to find inconsistency. But beyond that, I really just want to end by recentering us on the original topic, what the challenge was that was presented at the beginning of the debate, and whether that challenge was met. Right? So we're talking about, should our country keep providing military and financial assistance and diplomatic cover to Israel no matter what? Or is it actually quite bad to provide military and financial assistance and diplomatic cover to an apartheid state? And is it in particular very bad to do that at a time when that state is carrying out atrocities against its non-citizen population with no precedent since the original Nakba? That's the big picture question. And so you should ask yourself, as immediately, right when we started, Stephen redirected it to these completely off-topic questions and lingered in the details of those until we were done. But you should ask yourself, did you hear anything in all of that answered any of those challenges? Do you think Stephen gave us a convincing argument to absolve Israel on the charge of apartheid? We were arguing about that for a minute. That's half of the sort of core original question. And then we were off again. And do you think that he's given us a convincing argument to absolve Israel on the charge of ethnic cleansing of its non-citizen subjects in Gaza over the course of the last 9 months? And if you think the answer is no, that nothing that he's said, whatever else you think he's right about, that nothing that he's said has added up to a convincing argument to absolve Israel on either of those points, do you then agree that it's a bad thing, a shameful thing, for the United States to support an apartheid state that's engaged in large-scale atrocities against its internal non-citizen population? And that's the whole deal. Everything else is noise.
You got it. Thank you very much for those closings. We're going to jump into the Q&A. I want to do a couple of quick housekeeping things. Folks, if you didn't know, all of the debates at Modern Day Debate end up on the Modern Day Debate podcast as well. That's available on Fine Podcasts everywhere, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you name it. Find Modern Day Debate there. Listen to us on the go. And you can find our links or our guest links in the description box of both the Modern Day Debate YouTube video as well as the podcast. So check out our guest links, learn more about their views, check out their channels. As even if you disagree, there's a lot of value in hearing it straight from the horse's mouth. With that, thanks very much for your first question coming in from Isa Kabir. Says, my question is, what is the single best argument in just a few sentences that each would give for their own position? So just your very best argument, the strongest, in just a few sentences. We'll go left or right. Stephen, if you want to go first.
For our own positions?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for the United States to support Israel because I think Israel is a beacon of democracy in the Middle East. I think that the rights that they afford their citizens and the example that they set shows that like there are countries in that region that can do really well. I think that the benefits that we get like economically through trade and through military intelligence as well, I think are important. And the cost for supporting Israel so far seems to be relatively low compared to the totality of all of our foreign expenditures. So that's why I would support it.
You got it, Ben?
Yeah, I think if you rule over millions of people for 57 years without giving them citizenship in your country and declare your intention to never give them citizenship in your country or let them secede into their own state, that's apartheid. If you expel millions of people from their homes, that's ethnic cleansing. And it's very bad for the United States to support either of those things.
This one coming in from J Locks Jedi says, Brit here. Spent a month in Samaria and didn't see apartheid. Signage in Arabic and Hebrew, peaceful Israeli Arabs alongside everyone else while being citizens, etc., etc. Have you actually been there?
No, I certainly haven't, and I also haven't been to Saudi Arabia, but I'm perfectly comfortable criticizing Saudi Arabia's form of government, and I haven't been to hopped into a DeLorean to visit a part of South Africa in the 1980s, but I'm perfectly comfortable criticizing their form of government. And I think this idea that the stamps on your passport are relevant to any of these arguments one way or the other is something nobody would ever consistently apply. Everybody is appropriately critical of lots of forms of government of countries they haven't visited. And finally, I would suggest that that nothing that this person saw is relevant to millions of people being denied citizenship because of their ethnicity, and that there were probably Bantustans in apartheid South Africa where you saw signage in multiple languages.
You got it. Skill tree gaming.
Am I allowed to answer that question?
Yes.
I did visit Samaria, and I would say that the idea that you don't see different standards of living there is absolutely not true. If you go into any city in the West Bank, Samaria included, if certain people are hurt, like Jewish people or citizens of Israel, then the IDF will show up to protect you. And if you are if you are engaged in any activity that is found to be illegal, you as a Israeli citizen have a right to an Israeli court, an Israeli legal process. If you're a Palestinian living in the West Bank, that is not true. Samaria is neighboring to the city of Nablus. These are two different people that, depending upon your citizenship, enjoy two completely different rights and two completely, arguably, different standards of living because of even the natural resources that are allotted between these two places. So no, just because you've been to Samaria and you didn't see anything personally, that's great. If you have a Samarian friend that let you hang out in your house, you should hop over the gate sometime and go talk to the people in Nablus and ask them, what their lives are like. Any place in the West Bank that if you go and you look at the differences in standard of living, you can see the difference in a settlement that exists on top of a hill versus like a Palestinian city that lives at the low grounds. There's very obvious differences immediately, and there are different like legal and citizenship and travel differences as well. It's like it was very, very obvious. So I think that don't know question the guy is either bad faith, hasn't been there himself, or is turning a blind eye to the situation.
Skill tree gaming says, what does Ben have his doctorate in? Philosophy. Is there any specialization within philosophy, or is it philosophy more broadly, Ben?
Yeah, specialization is in philosophy of logic, basically the liar paradox, and whether that gives you a reason to question the principles of classical logic.
You got it. And Antonio Iniguez says, if Israel isn't allowed to defend itself against a terrorist state that killed 1,200 people, then when is it allowed to defend itself? Why should Israel agree to a ceasefire when October 7th ended a ceasefire?
Yeah, I mean, I think to start at the end, it is certainly the case that Israel and Hamas have both broken ceasefires in the past. So this could be an argument on either side to never agree to a ceasefire again, which is a good recipe for eternal war and conflict. But then the question is not just about defending itself. That even if we ignore, the events that led up to it and start the clock on October 7th, the question is, what does defending itself give you a right to do? If you have I think that the current Israeli estimates out of the 1,200 or so people who died on October 7th is about 700 were civilians. If that justifies evicting 1.9 million people from their homes, destroying every university in Gaza, including one by controlled demolition, blowing up all of these hospitals, schools, refugee camps, churches, mosques, then the better question is, if all of that is justified by Israel's right to self-defense, what would the Palestinians' right to self-defense from that justify?
You got it. Vile Van Gogh says, does
Wait, is
Dr.
that for just for
Bridges
one person? Are we allowed to answer these, or is it only to one person?
go for it?
Yeah, to compare the numbers of anything, I think is immediately evidencing the idea that we have no idea like what things are justified and what things aren't. It's not just a raw number count. The use ad bellum, the cause for war, was not only non-existent. Truly, it's not like Hamas was responding to a particular military attack. The conducted war, the use in bello, was also deplorable, not because of the number of people killed, but because of the, I would argue, the discriminate nature of the attacks. It's inaccurate to say that Hamas indiscriminately killed civilians on October 7th. They chose to kill civilians on October 7th. It's not like Hamas was recklessly firing into cities or recklessly firing into crowds to kill civilians. They explicitly were targeting and killing civilians that were at the Nova Festival. There was no question for whether these people were military targets or not. And then also this idea that's brought up over and over again, the evicting all the people on the Gaza Strip was so horrible. The evicting people was horrible, as opposed to what? If there are military targets there, would you rather them not evict the people and blow them all up? The eviction is part of moving people from place to place so that when you are bombing places, you're not just killing hundreds of thousands of civilians. It would be nice if the governing region or the governing body in Gaza, Hamas, was actually also interested in having humanitarian shelters, humanitarian corridors, bomb shelters, or anything built for the civilians, which is an obligation under the Geneva Conventions. It is part of international customary law, and it is an obligation placed on anybody that is administrative region. It would be nice if they did any of those things, but they don't. On the contrary, they store ammunition in mosques, they fire rockets from schools, and they move amongst their civilian population in plain clothes in an attempt to draw as many civilian casualties as possible. To just look at the numbers on both sides for this conflict is ridiculous.
Let's see. What I'm going to do is for these next ones, just because we want to speed through this and we only have 30 minutes allotted to the Q&A, if you guys are able to in 60 seconds. I know that puts a lot of pressure on you guys because these are like super heavy questions, but Dee Dee, thanks for your question, says, why did you once state Israel would have to genocide the Palestinians, and why do you let's see. And they say, we want to know an answer.
Yeah, this is a comment I made, I think, like a month before the October 7th conflict happened. I basically said that, like, it seems like the only end to this is going to be one side killing the other because it seems like there was no other resolution because there was no peace process to be had. I don't think that either side should genocide the other side. If you watch that full clip, like more than the 30 seconds it posted on Twitter, I literally say afterwards, it's a shitty situation and it seems like it's only going to end when one side eliminates the other. Obviously, that would be unideal, although I think that people like Ben would say that the destruction of the state of Israel and the occupation of it by an Arab majority that might lead to the mass expulsion, pogroming, or genociding of the Jews is like an acceptable outcome. But yeah, I don't think any side should be genocided.
Yeah, Stephen obviously knows that what he just said is a lie. Obviously, I don't support the expulsion of anybody. What I support, what I think would be the most just outcome would be Israel turning into a regular multi-ethnic democracy with equal rights for everybody who lives within the borders that it's been in for the last 57 years. So equal rights for Israeli Jews, Palestinian Christians and Muslims, Thai guest workers, everybody. If that's too utopian, the very least they could do would be to withdraw to their 1967 borders. But of course, I don't support expelling anybody. I'm certainly not the one in this conversation who's defended evicting millions of people from their homes.
So I'm from Watched Ing says, what of the UN linked reports which reduced the death count of women and children in half and confirmed there is no famine in Gaza within the last few months? Does that matter to the ongoing narrative?
I think it calls into question the credibility of some of these. I think third-party NGOs that people are so desperate to rely on in their condemnation of Israel. I think it looks really bad when we've been hearing reports about famine. There's been like over 100 articles posted. I've collected like 50 of these for literally months, and now we find out, oh well, actually the IPC5 rating was probably completely inappropriate, and the initial reports that these projections were built on were literally discounting like 80% of the aid that was going into the region, as evidenced by the fact that the mass deaths of starvation literally never happened. And then the fact that like some of these organizations now for the death counts, people are trying to use this weird argument like, well, they haven't revised down the total figure; they're just revising on the percentages. That's a lie. There are two different offices that were responsible for giving us basically death counts. You had the Gazan Health Ministry, and then you had the Gazan Media Office, the GMO versus the GH. The Gazan Health Ministry, the GHM. What happened was the media office was getting their percentages basically by reporting things like they heard in media reports about who was a dead person. So they've decided to switch to the Gazan Health Ministry, which is actually like confirming deaths. But the issue is that they noticed that when we switch from one set of numbers to the next, the percentage of of women and children that were killed was basically all of the discrepancy, which calls into question, why did we even rely on these numbers? So if it is the case that the total death count is the same, why is it that almost every single miscounted death happened to be a woman or a child? That is incredibly suspicious.
We'll give you a chance for 60 seconds as well, Ben.
Yeah, so I think that there are actually good, there actually have been lots of people who have been suffering from very bad malnutrition in Gaza. There are reports like this all the time. There are accounts of people having to like feed their newborn children animal feed. There are huge numbers of people who go in on one meal a day, less than one meal a day. The fact that people have been sounding the alarm bells for a long time about risk of famine and things are still at a level where lots of people suffer from malnutrition. There definitely are people who've died of it, but it hasn't translated into mass death at this time. I think is a very poor grounds for saying, okay, nothing to see here. It's totally fine that so much aid has been blocked from Gaza, because as long as you stay at the brink and you don't actually tip over at the brink, I guess everything's okay.
You got it. This one coming in from Mr. Borelli says, Burgess, let's see, they say on X, you retweeted that the HH occupation could have been avoided if Colombia just gave in to their demands. By your logic, wouldn't it be valid to say 1/6 could have been avoided if Congress just didn't certify Biden? So 1/6 meaning
Sure.
January 6th.
Yeah, it certainly would have been. So the question is, would not certifying, would the negotiating with the protesters about their demands or giving into some of those demands, would that have been as bad as not certifying the results of a national presidential election, right? Because if so, then that's a great analogy. If not, it's not. I have to say that my initial impulse would be that no, there's absolutely nothing that Columbia University could have done with its investments that would have been as bad as not certifying the results of a democratic election. But maybe this is something we'll have disagreement on.
Any thoughts, Stephen?
I don't have thoughts about this one now.
This one coming in from Do Appreciate It, aka Batusai, says, Ben, are you pro or con having gun control in Gaza?
Gun control in Gaza. Yeah, I think that if there's a independent Palestinian state at some point and it applies European style gun control rules, I wouldn't have the slightest problem with that. I think that if you're talking about a situation of military occupation, and whether it's in Gaza right now or in Iraq and Afghanistan when the United States was in those countries, and there's a lot of kicking down doors and such that can be done in the name of taking away guns. And I think that that's a very different question from whether in a more stable situation, gun control is a good idea.
You got it. Any thoughts, Stephen?
I don't think about gun control. No, I think there's other more pressing things to think about.
Sentient Toaster says, what about 2,000-pound bombs is the problem. The point I hear most often is that they are imprecise because they are quote unquote dumb. But no one seems to realize an aircraft has its own guidance systems.
Yeah, I mean, the issue about 2,000-pound bombs is just that they're likely to, they're likely to kill a lot more people than other bombs. And if you create a bigger explosion, you are more likely to kill people, even who you didn't necessarily mean to kill, or even weren't the people who you at least thought you could justify trying to kill. And that no matter how precise the system for guiding the 2,000-pound bomb to its destination is, it is still the case that it's going to cause more destruction, and likely more destruction of people other than the intended target.
You got it.
Any conversation about weaponeering is a complete and total red herring. I haven't encountered a single person that makes arguments over the types of weapons that Israel is allowed to use that believes that Israel even has a just cause for war. Basically, every single time somebody brings up an issue with a particular type of weapon, if you ask them, oh, well, what should they be using instead? They will basically never provide an alternative. Then they'll say, well, actually, I don't think this war should be happening whatsoever. So the haggling over the types of weapons that are allowed or aren't allowed, I think, is a complete and total waste of time. People don't even know why you might use a particular weapon over another weapon, and they just say that this is probably bad because it's a bigger number, so it must kill more people. And there's no other possible application of this weapon other than maximizing the amount of people that you might be killing.
Folks, want to remind you, looking for serious questions. So if it's just an insult of a person, we don't want it. Hamza 1711 says, how is this not going to destroy Palestine? A cycle of creating terrorists, destroying them, and creating more terrorists.
I mean, not to trigger anybody, but to look at the historical record. It's just kind of always been the reality is that the Palestinian people historically, and truly the neighbors as well, just don't want Israel or Jews to exist there as a people that have a country. That's just kind of been the case from the start. The idea that it's actually some thing that Israel is doing is what's making these people not like them is just not true. Again, from the very beginning of the existence of Israel, as soon as they started to basically pour onto that continent, all of the Arabs in the region were like, we do not want you here. We do not want you to have a state here. We do not want you here. Please fucking leave. Nasser said, to the trade unionists, this is going to be a war of annihilation. If it comes to this, we will destroy every single, all of Israel. Again, anything else is just like I think it's just a red herring. This has always been the intention from the start. The idea that we can't engage in some war because it'll radicalize the people there. I mean, that's a thing that only a Western person could say. The idea that you would posit this to an Arab, like, oh wow, do you guys hate Israel because of something that they'd say, no, we don't ever want this country here. We've never wanted this country here. If you ask an Israeli, do you think that if you guys just stopped at this, that the surrounding Arabs would all love you? They would also love us. Say, no, they've hated us since we've been here for the past 100 years, and when we've existed in their kingdoms before that. So no, I think it's obviously you should be mindful of like how you could radicalize people, or your conduct might lead to further problems on the road. These are things you should obviously be concerned about. But the idea, this like fantastically delusional, white Western mind of like, oh well, if we just turn this one thing off, everybody, will get in their Sunday suits and go and vote for democracy and respect the equal rights of everybody. It's just kind of like a Western delusion, a projection of our modern system, onto other countries that might not necessarily have people that share those same values at this particular point in time.
Yeah, the level of ethnic essentialism in that answer was off the charts. That if you ask an Arab, right, all of the Arabs think the same thing. They just object to any Jews being present. Never mind if we're talking about all Arabs. That the entire Arab League has been offering full diplomatic recognition for Israel in exchange for withdrawing to the 67 border and making a symbolic concession on the refugees since 2002. And on the question specifically of the Palestinians, that this idea, right? I mean, and again, it's very telling, right? It's like there's a giant Arab hive mind that we started talking about why the Palestinians would be radicalized. And then suddenly we were talking about Nasser. They have that if we're talking about the Palestinians, the idea that the ethnic cleansing of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in 1948, or the fact that since 1967, millions of Palestinians have been living as non-citizen subjects, of Israel in humiliating conditions. The idea that this has nothing to do with the motivations, that if none of this stuff was true, that, there would still be just as much conflict because of their deep hatred of Jews, I have to say is a dispatch from an alternate dimension.
This one from James Castile. Thanks very much. That's question for Dr. Burgess. How can you blaze past the fact that Hamas very clearly co-locates military assets next to civilians? Hamas themselves have admitted as much. It seems ludicrous to think that Israel should just not fight back.
Yeah, I think that there's a pretty wild false dichotomy between saying that you have to either do nothing or kill more children that have died in all the war zones in the world in recent years, displace literally millions of people from their homes, etc. That you couldn't do targeted assassinations of particular Hamas leaders, special operations, etc. Without being engaged in this kind of all-out destruction, and more particularly that you couldn't actually seek to go towards a long-term resolution of the conflict, because I think that's the only way that you're not going to get an eternal cycle of violence, is to either do what I would most want, which would just to grant equality to everybody within their existing borders, or failing that, to withdraw to the 1967 borders so there can be a real Palestinian state and these people can finally be citizens of something. Those are the things that are going to get you a future that doesn't have eternal war and violence. And I know you said 60 seconds, but just very, very quickly on the question of putting military assets close to civilians, I would point out that that there is a lot of that all around. If you look, for example, at the building where Netanyahu meets his war cabinet in Tel Aviv, and look at all of the civilian stuff that is surrounding that on all sides. And I bring that up not for the sake of whataboutery, but rather to ask us to apply consistent standards and to think about what we would think that justified.
Any thoughts, Stephen?
Yeah. So again, every single thing he says is a lie. None of these things are true. Whenever somebody criticizes a particular type of a way of conducting war, the other side will say, "Oh, they can't do that. They need to do this. Oh, they can't do that. Oh, they can do this." Like, it would be interesting if in another world we saw, "Oh, well, if Israel did special operations, would people like Ben Burgess actually support it?" The answer would be no. He might say another thing, but thankfully we live in this world. We can literally go and look. There were 4 hostages that were rescued as part of a special operation. The article that Ben Burgess wrote on that starts with, "Last Saturday, Israel massacred hundreds of Palestinian civilians in an operation to rescue 4 Israeli hostages. American commentators rushed to justify the brutal operation." Remember, when these people say, "I don't like the type of weapon used, I don't like the particular strategy, I don't like this," what they're really saying is Israel does not deserve to fight. They should never fight. They don't have any cause for war whatsoever, and they should be forced to accept whatever concessions the surrounding countries want to place on them. That is always the prime directive. Anything else is a red herring. Also, even the numbers that people use are again fantastical. And I understand that maybe because they're brown, maybe because they're Arabs, Ben doesn't give a fuck about whether they live or die. But for the rest of us in the world that live in reality, the idea that like more children have died here than any blah 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 blah, it's just fucking bullshit. Again, just look to Yemen. Even Save the Children has said that like over 80,000 children have died. Over 80,000 children have died of starvation or extreme hunger in Yemen over the past conflict. That's in one country, in one particular conflict.
We'll
so no, the idea that like,
yeah, okay. This one from Bezos Anti-Bullying Agency says, why is it okay for the Muslims to take Palestine from the Romans by force, but it's not okay for Jewish people to take it from the Muslims by force? Why is Islamic expansionism excused but not European?
I wouldn't excuse it. I mean, I don't know where people got the impression, where this person got the impression that I've offered any sort of take here on Roman or medieval history, which are certainly not subjects that I've weighed in on. But yeah, if the question is like, is medieval Muslim expansionism bad, then sure. And if we could go back in time and have the United States provide military and diplomatic and financial assistance to that, I would be against that too, obviously.
You got it. This one coming in from Or Stephen,
Can
any
I do
thoughts on
it?
it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Just as a quick thing. It is again. It is. I'm just going to keep pointing it out. It's always the red herrings. We just don't want the United States to provide financial assistance. That is another lie. When you are declaring that a country is, and this is an easy way to just ask them, if you're declaring that a country is engaged in genocide and apartheid and forcing 2 million people to live in ethnically unfair conditions that are akin to a concentration camp, and then you ask them, what should we do? Their response will never be, oh, well, we just shouldn't fund them. Of course not. The reason why you invoke the ICC from The Hague, the reason why you bring in the ICJ from the United Nations, because you want them to bring these charges so that there is a compulsion from the international community to do something. That's why Ben's largest contention earlier about the U.S. support for Israel was funding for Israel and the block from the UN Security Council. What does the block from the UN Security Council do? It prevents other countries from taking action. So these people do want regime change, and the whole reason why you get these massive crimes levied against Israel is so that an external force does come and do something about it. Just removing U.S. funding is not enough. It is another red herring.
This one from Thiologist says, do you guys have any book recommendations for a layman looking for a better understanding of the history of this conflict?
I recommend Wikipedia. That's where I got all of my information from. I have not met a single person that seems to have even a fraction of the historical knowledge required to even begin to engage in the conversation here. If you want to be misinformed, you can look at somebody like Finkelstein. If you want to be completely misinformed about how world politics works, if you want to have like a tabula rasa appearance and you want to claim that everybody's a fucking racist because they engage in racial tension, read somebody like Edward Said, I guess. It just depends on what you're looking for. There are different authors in Israeli history that have like different benefits. But I mean, yeah, that's what I would say. Wikipedia, good source.
Yeah, well, I was going to suggest Rashid Khalidi, The 100 Years' War in Palestine, but I am now curious about which Wikipedia entry Stephen derived this knowledge that I secretly want to, I guess, invade Israel. And when I say that I want to that I object to U.S. assistance, that's code for I support a war of a kind that I've never supported anywhere in the world. Just like with the Saudi war in Yemen, I was opposed to U.S. assistance for that, but I certainly wasn't advocating that the 182nd Airborne be landed in Riyadh to impose regime change.
Cute got it. This one coming in from, do appreciate it. Coding Jesus. Let's see. As well as Tim Owen09 says, please recommend Mr. Anderson's videos to Destiny. Is Mr. Anderson, who's that? Is that your friend?
I have no idea.
All right. This one coming in from just Mr. Anderson. All right. Admiral says, why does Ben even accept these debates when he clearly. Okay, that's. Jesse Irwin says, are there any peace initiatives put forth under previous leaders such as Clinton, Olmert, Obama, etc., that you found to be promising that could be models for the future?
Are there? Wait.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Do you want to start or should I?
What was it? Can you restate that? What was it?
I said, are there any peace initiatives put forth under previous leaders such as Clinton, Olmert, or Obama, etc., that you found to be promising that could be models for the future?
I mean, my answer is simple. I think the Clinton parameters were a really ingeniously devised set of parameters that ideally both sides could come together and agree on in order to formulate some ending agreement. But
yeah, I mean, I think that the big equivocation here is always when people talk about a Palestinian state or a two-state solution, do they mean a demilitarized semi-state pockmarked by annexed settlement blocks and Israeli roads patrolled by Israeli soldiers and obviously subject to aggression and intervention at will by the regional superpower next door? Or do they mean withdrawing all the way to the pre-1967 borders so there can be a real Palestinian state, with a Palestinian army and navy, it could defend itself in the entire territory that would leave? Because those are two very different ideas. As far as peace initiatives in the past, one that I think is particularly relevant on exactly the grounds that Stephen recommended earlier, that you should always focus on what's going on in the Middle East when evaluating these things, is the Arab Peace Initiative that was signed on to 22 years ago by the vast majority of the surrounding countries that Israel generally prefers to pretend doesn't exist.
You got it. This one coming in from, do appreciate it. Manga Fan Dan says, is it necessary for Israel to go nuclear in Gaza?
Is it necessary for Israel to go nuclear in Gaza? Wait, what?
I think they mean to end the conflict, or maybe
I think it's
just
okay for them to. I think for them to go after Hamas, I think is fine. Obviously, they have their obligations that they should fulfill as much as they can in terms of like humanitarian delivering to the other population, which I think now the UN has agreed it seems to be the case. So yeah, I think they have that cross for. I will also say this Arab peace resolution keeps getting brought up over and over and over and over again. If you've actually gone through any of the Arab peace resolution, that peace resolution will probably never be included in any serious ending agreement because I'm pretty sure that the Arab Peace Initiative specifically refers to Resolution 194, which basically calls for the resettlement of all Arab refugees back to the country of Israel. I don't believe that there has ever been a Palestinian leader. It surely wasn't Arafat. It's not been Mahmoud Abbas. There's never been a Palestinian leader that's been willing to ever give up any part of the right of return for any refugee.
all right. This one coming in from, do appreciate it. Clutch Gene says, Gaza shares a border with Egypt. What role, if any, does Egypt have in the circumstances of the people in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that's constantly brought up. What about Egypt? Why don't you talk about Egypt's role in enforcing the blockade? And I've never really been sure what the point is or what this was supposed to prove. The military dictatorship that runs Egypt, that the U.S. was supportive of when it came back to power, precisely because it thought it would be a more reliable partner for various kinds of geopolitical reasons. Has for the vast majority of the time, since 1978, gotten massive infusions of U.S. aid, which are to a great extent a bribe precisely to go along with things like this. So it's what you should expect. Also, just as a point of fact, the Arab Peace Initiative uses the phrase a just resolution of the refugee question. They would not say that if they meant every single refugee gets to come back. And in fact, Yasser Arafat, the same year, 2002, wrote an op-ed for the New York Times. Anybody can Google, called The Palestinian Vision of Peace, where he also uses that phrase just resolution. And he explains explicitly that what he means is that there would be a symbolic number of refugees would come back, right, as a part of a recognition of wrongdoing in 1948. But he said only a symbolic number to recognize Israel's demographic concerns.
You got it. This one coming in from, do appreciate it. Dylan.
Wait, did I answer that question?
Yes.
Okay.
If you'd like, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just saying in response to that. Arafat has written and said many things to the media. That's kind of the point of being Arafat. We can say that, he wrote in a newspaper that he would accept a particular thing, but when it came time to actually negotiate, he absolutely never accepted any of these things. When they say a just resolution to the end of the refugee problem, there's a reason why that is kept intentionally vague. When the Palestinian delegation rejected the Clinton parameters, one of the things that they had explicitly said, and there's like a 20-page document that's leaked that has like the Israeli and the Palestinian reservations, they say that we would not give up the right of a single refugee to return. There's a thing that you can say to the newspapers, and there's a thing that you can say when it actually comes time to negotiate. I'm not aware in any negotiations of any Palestinian delegation ever saying that they'd be willing to give up the right of return at that particular point in time. I know some people might want to bring up Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas. They might want to say like, he said he would do it. Yeah, in 2010, 2 years after the negotiations with Olmert. It never happens during the negotiations. It always comes afterwards when they can try to salvage their reputation in the international community. Otherwise, just ask, during any negotiations, were there any Palestinians that said they'd be willing to give that particular thing up? And they stood by that and Israel walked away from that deal. It has never happened. There will never be an example.
This one coming in from, do appreciate it. Friendly Fella says, Dr. Burgess, should there be international pressure on countries that refuse to resettle Palestinian refugees? If so, how?
I think that any Palestinian refugee who wants to resettle elsewhere should be allowed to do so. But at that point, we're just talking about something that's much bigger and more utopian, which would be something like universal free movement of people, right? People could just move wherever they like, which is a much more ambitious ask than just saying that that refugees from ethnic cleansing and their families should be allowed to return to the place where they were ethnically cleansed from, which I think is a much more plausible universal principle, and in fact, one that I think a lot of people would accept without a second thought in any other context, right? Which is why, as with the one state, two state issue, I think that the most just outcome would indeed be allowing every single refugee to return. Nevertheless, I think using a very careful diplomatic phrase like just resolution is a pretty good indication that you're backing away from that absolutism. And certainly the idea that a Palestinian negotiator giving a set of reservations would include that is a very different thing from saying, oh, otherwise this is acceptable to us, right? Our one sticking point is that we're not willing to concede this. I think the idea that if Israel were willing to withdraw all the way to the 1967 borders, allow a real Palestinian state, was even willing to admit wrongdoing and accept a symbolic number of refugees back, that PLO negotiators would just say, no, we're holding out for every single one. I see zero evidence for that.
This one coming in from
Wait, yeah, I'll say that too. The evidence for that is literally every single negotiation ever. Nobody has ever given a solid amount during negotiations of refugees that they would accept. It always comes years after the negotiations have ended. Immerse suggested a number of refugees that were allowed back. Abbas didn't counter, and then he said 2 years later that he might consider another thing. There is no ever concrete example given on the Palestinian side. Also, I don't know if it's a poor reading of history or current fact or literally every single part of this to say that the Palestinian refugee has been treated in an exceptionally bad way in terms of what the expectations for resettlement are is exactly wrong. It is completely wrong, ahistorical, and afactual. The reality is most refugees, all refugees besides Palestinians are resettled. Their cases are referred to the UNHCR, the United Nations of the High Commissioner for Refugees. Every single refugee has an attempt to be resettled. The only refugee that this doesn't apply to are the Palestinian refugees. Their things are referred to UNRWA. UNRWA's job is just to feed and educate them, not to resettle them explicitly. Not only does UNRWA explicitly not resettle Palestinian refugees, Palestinians are also, on ethnic grounds, explicitly denied citizenship in every single Arab country where they're hosted. As of Arab Resolution, I think 1537 or 1547, they literally are not even allowed to give them citizenship. Even in countries where they do have citizenship, like Jordan, Jordan has millions of Palestinian refugees, millions of Palestinian citizens, 3/4 of them are still considered refugees, despite the fact they have Jordanian citizenship. So the Palestinian refugee issue is explicitly unique, and no other refugee has ever been treated like them in all of human history. They are explicitly kept as refugees to use as weapons against Israel.
To the next one. Did I read this one? Dylan, thanks very much for your question. Said, Ben, can you name a Muslim majority country that Jewish people have existed in peacefully? Do you still prescribe a Muslim majority democracy? Isn't that political suicide? Maybe even ethnic suicide?
Yeah, again, I'm still waiting for the non-essentialist reason to think that the treatment of Jews in theocracies and dictatorships and monarchies is a good guide to how Jewish people would fare in a democratic republic that was, had somewhat of an Arab majority. Although actually, if you just gave everybody citizenship tomorrow, there would be approximately equal numbers of Arab and Jewish citizens. Judaism would still be the plurality religion in the country. And again, it seems to me, I don't think that theocracies, dictatorships, monarchies, these are good models for having lots of rights for minorities. But I also don't see any non-essentialist reason to think that therefore a democratic republic with approximately equal numbers of Arabs and Jews would be one where the current realities are reversed and there's ethnic cleansing of Jews, or they're brutally repressed, or anything like that.
Jumping into this next one.
It's a non-reading of history. That different people can have different cultures. There doesn't have to be anything that's racially essentialized for that. The Palestinians that live in Israel have a higher affinity towards democratic governments than the Arabs that live in other states, especially under the monarchies in the Gulf, especially under the dictatorships in North Africa and in the wider Middle East. Like, yeah, you don't have to have a racial essentials argument. You can't bring it. You can't keep saying every single time somebody asks you, what are the Muslim majority or Arab majority countries where Jews live happily? You can't just keep crying, oh, you're being racist. Oh, you're being racist. Like, most Muslims and most Arabs in the Middle East would tell you, yeah, fuck them. We don't want them to have equal rights. They don't deserve it. Either our religion demands that they don't, or the history that we've suffered as a result of the Nakba, as a result of them intruding on our continent, as a result of them, leaving us over encumbered with all the other shit we've dealt with, whether that's enemy dolphins or pigeons or whatever the fuck that they're blaming on Israel now. A lot of them would say, no, fuck these people. We don't want them here. There's nothing racially essentialized about that. Different people have different histories. Sometimes they have different cultural components to why they believe the things they do. And there are particular cultures that run in different parts of the world. No part of that demands that any particular person be racist. It's just a ridiculously stupid way to dodge the question of like, well, which Muslim or Arab majority country should have Jews ever lived happily under?
Fact Junior Roll says, Destiny, what group and or leader would you think could best lead Palestinians in peace deals if Hamas needs to be removed?
I think the Palestinian Authority should do it. I think Mahmoud Abbas is probably the person or his successor. I think that if Israel wants to have a negotiating partner on the Palestinian side, I think Israelis need to stop undermining the things that are working, and they need to stop undermining Palestinian leadership. It is ridiculous that you went from Arafat to Abbas, and Israeli leadership seems to be content in treating both of them the same. Abbas is not a perfect partner. I understand that. But the fact that you've got a guy who is willing to stand up against violence, for the most part, at least compared to Arafat, but you still call him a fucking terrorist, seems to undermine the entire point of the creation of the Palestinian Authority and the president that they have. So I think Israel needs to do what they can to support the PA, whether that's channeling money through them and not trying to undermine them with other people like Hamas, and whether that means conducting, like business with them in ways where you're making deals that are leaving Palestinian people not feeling like they're living under the thumb of an oppressive Israeli regime, including Palestinians in the West Bank, because they're there too, and they're not going anywhere. You have to deal with that. I think it's essential for Israel. They need to see the PA as a legitimate partner, and they need to start treating them as such, rather than kicking the can down the road and assuming they're going to disappear in the future.
Yeah, I think that the idea that Hamas is going to be removed as a result of a war where literally millions of people, the overwhelming majority of the population, are displaced, where there is this massive count of corpses, of people who are maimed, etc. Certainly, the claim about children in war zones in recent years is correct, and what's true in Yemen a couple of years ago is actually off topic. But it's also I also just want to point out the sheer absurdity in pointing out, as Stephen keeps getting triggered by the word essentialism. He's adding racial. I didn't say that, but they have by the word essentialism, that in his defense, he is saying, oh, well, these 2 million Israeli Arabs, those actually are people who aren't going to act this way because they're going to have this predilection toward democracy. Well, if so, that's because they've been awarded democratic rights for decades, which I'm suggesting extending to millions of other people. Also, those would be 2 million people toward the total that would get you approximately equal numbers of Jewish and Arab citizens if they gave everybody citizenship. So I don't understand how, for the purposes of defending himself against the charge of essentialism, those people are, nice and pro-democratic, but for the purposes of counting them towards a possible Arab majority in the future, they can't be trusted because, after all, Jews have been oppressed in other Arab and Muslim countries in the past.
Into this one from Sunflower says, have either of you heard about the recent claim from the IDF that an Al Jazeera reporter held hostages at his home in central Gaza? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of different aspects of the world that are kind of embedded in Gaza with Hamas. I mean, whether that's what we've seen with UNRWA, whether we've seen international people like reporters or media. The reality is that Hamas is also like the administrator to the region, so it's hard to separate them out completely from the Al-Qassam brigades. It's hard to separate them out from the military component of it as well. I mean, I think it's bad if you're an Israeli, you're basically saying like, well, look, we told you so to the rest of the world. I mean, but if you're the rest of the world who's never cared about that in the past, you're going to find ways to endlessly justify it and say, well, actually, this is a epic resistance and fuck Israel is genocidal and apartheid, or you'll just deny that it ever happened anyway. And then also I will say the only reason I push back is because it was Ben who said the racial essentialism is off the charts. And when you say Arab and essentialism, the only thing that you are invoking is the idea of race. I don't know what else could be essential when we're talking about Arabs besides the race, unless you mean essentialism like people that have certain clothes or something. I don't know what else we could possibly be referring to there when we say essentialism.
Yeah, I did not, in fact, use the word racial there. That's not true. Go back and look. They have I think, ethnic, cultural. I mean, I think, again, the idea that there is something in any group of people, whether we're talking about Jews, Arab, Muslims, etc., that make them incapable of treating each other equally in a democracy. That is what I'm objecting to. Very briefly on the question about the journalist. Yes, you have a journalist who was participating in that. Then you have a tremendous number of journalists who were not engaged in anything remotely like that. Both Palestinians and foreign journalists who have been slaughtered at really shocking rates by the Israeli military.
This one from Stephen M. says, can either of you steel man the other side's argument? For Ben, the pro-Israeli argument to the current conflict, and Stephen, the pro-Palestine side. Maybe if you just, let's say you were to steel man your opponent's strongest argument in just a few sentences, just like you gave your own best argument for your side at the very beginning of the Q&A.
Yeah. Waiting for Ben to go first on this one.
Oh, really? Okay, I was waiting for you to go first.
Go left to right, Stephen, if you want to go first.
Do I really? Sure. I mean, the steelman position is that essentially in the 40s, Jews basically started flooding into the Middle East in a particular area that had been sectioned off by mandates that was ideally going to be reserved for an Arab majority government, just like it had in every other part of the Middle East that was carved off for Arab mandates. And the people there felt incredibly fucked over. They got fucked over by the British, they felt that way. Then they got fucked over by the Jews that carved out some land there. Then they got fucked over by the Jordanians and the Egyptians and the Syrians that invaded and took land there and didn't keep any of their interests in mind. And then they got fucked over by all the Arabs that basically abandoned them in their quest for territorial absolution when Egypt signed peace, when Jordan signed peace, and then with the Abraham Accords when several other Muslim majority countries signed peace. So you basically have a group of people that have been encouraged to fight for land that they felt like was theirs, that to some extent, I think you can argue they reasonably feel like they got completely fucked out of a long time ago, and they've been essentially abandoned by every single other party willing to fight for them, except for Iranian extremists and Iranian proxy groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. I think that as of today, they probably look at the situations that they live in and they say, oh, wow, well, we got a whole bunch of people in the West Bank that essentially have no right of travel, no right of military. You know, we've got our Palestinian Authority that we saw as corrupt under Arafat and it's corrupt under Abbas. And the one time that you allow us to sort of have democratic elections and support a particular group, you try to coup them in the Gaza Strip, which is what happened to Hamas. And it's why Hamas started throwing Fatah off buildings, because there was a U.S. and Israeli-backed coup by Fatah to get rid of Hamas after the elections. Israel's unwillingness to help the Palestinian Authority secure any rights for Palestinian people probably make them feel, especially now as you get a generation of people that have been brought up under this, like they have absolutely no future. There's absolutely no world where Israel's ever going to grant them a state. The Palestinian Authority is essentially a defunct agency that only serves as a security subcontractor for Israel, and Hamas is your only path to having like an actual state. Probably leaves them feeling incredibly desperate and makes it so that the only thing that they see themselves being able to do in the future are terrorist attacks against Israel until they finally get the recognition that they want, so that people come back to the negotiating table.
All right, Ben.
Yeah, that seemed like a steel man of the Hamas position. I don't know what it had to do with mine, but in any case, yeah, I've been sitting here for the last couple of minutes trying to, trying to think of the best argument that I possibly can in favor of this position. I mean, I think that I think certainly the best one that we actually heard was about leverage. I think that I guess the only thing I would add to it is that it's you could point to just the fact that there isn't a force on the ground fighting for the sort of outcome that I'm saying would be the most just, as a reason to think that that's never going to happen anyway. So you have to choose between evils, and at least Israel is however bad much of what it does isn't as bad as it would be if Hamas somehow created a Islamic State in the whole area or something like that. So I know that wasn't a great attempt, but I'm not trying to. I'm genuinely doing my best here to try to think of what I could say that would actually be a good argument for this position. Beyond what's been made.
This one
Okay, am I
from
allowed to give a steel man for the position, or?
Well, I mean, am I allowed to give one for mine? I certainly don't feel like you did.
You don't think that my position was in a steel man of the Palestinian position?
I don't think it was a steel man of the position that I was arguing for tonight by any means.
I don't know what you're arguing for. I don't think you've existed.
You don't know what I'm arguing for? I don't know how it possibly could have been more clear that I think that what Israel is doing counts as apartheid and ethnic cleansing, and it's wrong for the United States to support that. I don't know how I could have been more clear on that in the opening. I don't know how I could have been more clear in bringing that back up. I realize that you prefer to talk about anything but that's my position.
Okay, my bad. I'm sorry, I fucked up. The steelman for Ben's position is that we need to use the biggest, meanest words possible to describe what Israel is doing. We need to misappropriate terms like apartheid, even though the fact is the Palestinians living in the neighboring states that are explicitly denied citizenship on ethnic grounds and are explicitly denied resettlement on ethnic grounds. We should actually say that it's Israel that's engaging in apartheid, whose Arab population lives with more rights and freedoms afforded to them than any other Arab state in literally the entire history of the planet for an ordinary citizen, assuming you're not royalty or you're not a religious, rabbi or priest or whatever the fuck, right? That people are engaging in apartheid. And then also I would say they're also engaging in genocide, not the Syrians who killed some 200 to 500,000 people, not Saddam Hussein, who used chemical weapons against his people, not Gaddafi, who tortured and murdered political opponents, and not the Houthis, who, routinely starve huge groups of people and commandeer humanitarian aid to allow other adversaries in the country to die. Those people are engaged in a genocide. In actuality, it's actually Israel that's engaged in genocide. The people that drop leaflets on buildings and tell people to flee buildings, and the people that waste $500,000 on precise munitions to kill 4 people that people like Ben are going to cry over civilians anyways. That's the steelman argument. My bad. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, at least that diary of whataboutism that we just heard makes me feel a little bit better about not being able to come up with a better argument on behalf of Stephen's position. So thank you for that.
This one from Boxer Santoro.
Wait, hold on. I'm so sorry. My bad. Hold on. Wait, my bad. The steelman of Ben's position is, as the United States, we should put our money and our resources to supporting people that mirror the values that we have. That in the United States, if you're going to support other countries, just because they're in a bad region of the world doesn't mean you can support bad behavior or bad actions. Otherwise, what the fuck does it matter if the United States is supporting you? If the United States sees itself as a funder of moral armies or moral causes around the world, the reality is that if we fund or support somebody, we need to have them rise to the standards that we believe that our country ought to live by. The fact that they might live in a more despotic or a more apocalyptic or whatever the fuck reason isn't a good enough reason to allow them to exist in those conditions. Otherwise, why support them at all? The money that our dollars go towards, the countries that our dollars go towards should resemble our values as much as possible. Otherwise, why would we allot our money to them? That would probably be more along the steelman lines for the argument that you're making.
We should probably move to this one. Boxer Santoro says, Ben/Destiny, do you think terms genocide, self-determination, apartheid, and etc. operate as accurate accounts or just Russell conjugations that stipend conversations about this conflict?
Yeah, I get. Oh, sorry, you go.
I would say yes, obviously. When you use these types of words, the implication is that the international community is going to come along and save Palestinians. That's probably not what's going to happen. It's also not an accurate accounting of what's going on the ground. That's why people have such a bad factual understanding. And it gets you away from talking about the things that are actually important. Issues relating to Palestinians aren't the fact that they don't have access to money or that they're all starving to get to death. It's the fact that they live without any honor or dignity. It's the fact that they feel subjugated as a people in a land that they feel like was torn away from them, 100 years ago, not because of like a particular standard of living, but because of all of the rich history and culture that Arab society used to enjoy that's now they feel has been robbed from them by a foreign invader. The words are bad because they draw an unrealistic expectation for what the Palestinian side thinks that they're entitled to, and it replaces any good conversation about, well, what are things that we can actually do or actually talk about to further the standards of people in these areas. Sorry for that burp.
Yeah. I think that if you are denying millions of people that you've ruled over for almost 6 decades citizenship and basic rights because of their ethnicity, which I think that when we went back and forth about it, it seemed like there was never actually a counter argument on that claim. Instead, Stephen just pivoted to, well, why do you think they're so concerned about that?
Wait, what's the ethnicity?
That the reason why.
Wait, what's the ethnicity that they deny rights to? Just could you specify that in your answer?
Yeah, that millions of people in the West Bank and Gaza have been
West Bank
denied.
and Gaza, are those ethnicities? Those sound like geographic regions to me.
No,
What is the
there
ethnicity?
there was going to be a rest of the sentence that those people have been denied rights because of their ethnicity, because of
Which
being Arabs,
ethnicity?
because if you added those millions of Arabs to the 2 million who are already citizens of Israel, then you would lose the Jewish character of the state. That's the explicit argument. And that is an argument, even if you think it's justified, that is an argument, in defense of denying millions of people rights because they belong to the wrong ethnic group. I think that that is, in fact, textbook apartheid, and it's really important to acknowledge that because once you have, then the question is, can you justify supporting it? And if you're going to say that sometimes apartheid can be justified, I really want people to own that argument. And again, I just want people to note this mind reading where Stephen keeps saying that secretly what we want, what people like me want, isn't in fact for the United States to stop supporting apartheid in Israel, that instead we want the United States or some other country to go in militarily and intervene, which of course is nonsense. I could acknowledge that Saddam Hussein was an authoritarian mass murderous dictator without saying, therefore, I support regime change.
When we say textbook apartheid, how many blacks were part of the government in South Africa, and how many blacks had the same rights as whites in apartheid South Africa? Because we said textbook apartheid. Just curious, what's the answer to those two questions?
Apartheid doesn't mean that it's similar to South Africa in every single way. Apartheid means that
you did textbook though.
Yes, right? but that doesn't mean that any difference means that it doesn't count. They have the thing that makes it apartheid. The core thing that makes it apartheid is having millions of people denied basic rights because of their ethnicity. Again, it's true that not everybody in Israel is denied these rights based on their ethnicity, but that was my point earlier when I said that this is a bit like saying that nobody in the United States was denied voting rights for being black in 1940 because there were states where black people could vote in 1940. Yeah, there are parts of Israel where Arabs are given citizenship, but there are other parts of Israel where Arabs are denied citizenship, because if they extended it to Arabs in those parts, then you would lose the Jewish character of the state. That is the explicit claim that's going to be made by every Israeli politician, every Western Zionist. None of them are shy about it. You seem to be suggesting earlier that you thought that was justified, but whether you think it's justified or not is a separate question from whether it is true that millions of people are denied these rights because of their ethnicity.
Didymus says, Ben, should Pakistan be able to return their former homes in India or Germans to Western Poland?
Yes, to be sure. I think so. Yeah, I think that I'm always really shocked when people bring up the example of ethnic Germans in Eastern Europe, because of course this is one of Stalin's crimes, right? I mean, it's exactly the sort of thing that people have in mind when they think about Stalin's crimes: the mass deportation of entire ethnicities. In this case, ethnic Germans from parts of Eastern Europe that were at that point controlled by the Red Army, and it's a very strange sort of horseshoe that leads people to implicitly defend that for the sake of defending Zionism. But yes, I think in all of these cases, I would be against preventing that families that were removed by force and acts of ethnic cleansing from coming home. Of course, it's an easy question.
Well, just curious, do you know about the approximate numbers of people that were expelled, ethnic Germans from Europe? I think it was some almost, you don't have to have it, it's just fine. It's almost like 20 million people. I don't know the descendants of that today. That would be an unbelievable. Also, I thought earlier we made the argument that the historical thing of who is expelled from where didn't actually matter. Because if that's the case, then why don't we just go back to the year, whatever, zero, when Israelis or Jewish people were expelled from the Middle East? Like, should everybody have the right to go back to every place they were ever expelled from ever? It just seems like completely, totally unworkable. Also, just as a heads up for the audience, apartheid, the core part of apartheid, it has nothing to do with not giving citizens or non-citizens the same right that citizens have. The textbook part about apartheid is racial domination. The motivation for apartheid, and by the way, this is a term that became somewhat generalized for some reason after it was used specifically and created specifically in South Africa. Racial domination means that you do not have Arab members that are part of your court. You do not have Arab members that are part of your Knesset, your parliament. You do not have Arabs that enjoy essentially the same rights and freedoms that you have in the entirety of your country. So no, the core part of apartheid has nothing to do with not giving rights to non-citizens, regardless of why those non-citizens might have been non-citizens.
I hate to do this, but
It's that
we
the
really
reason
have
they're
to
not
move forward.
citizens is because their ethnicity, just like Black South Africans weren't made citizens of South Africa because as citizens of these like legal fiction Bantustans.
Oh, are we lagged out?
This one from set. I didn't know if your sentence ended, if you meant to end it, or if you got
Yes.
cut off. Ben. Oh, okay. Isa Martel says Jewish people live peacefully in Morocco since Spain kicked them out with the Inquisition. There is an Orthodox synagogue in Marrakech. I'm saying that right.
Yeah, I think Morocco is a country, but I think Morocco is considered like one of the only countries. There might be a few thousand in Tunisia as well, but they're very, very, very small numbers. I would have to look at the history of Morocco to see if there have been any pogroms or anything like that. But again, the number of Jews living in Morocco is like it's like a few thousand Jews. Nowhere near the Palestinian population that lives in Israel today.
Chase Hatchett says, "Man, this flat
Yeah,
Earth
well,
debate."
just very briefly, right? There's a reason that I didn't bring up any of these examples because I'm not interested in defending Morocco or Tunisia's standard of the rights accorded to religious minorities in those countries is fine. People should be happy with that because I think that has nothing to do with anything. I think that you
This
can
one.
acknowledge that, look, for the sake of argument, say all of these countries are way below any reasonable standard. I don't think that that's a good argument.
This one, can't tell if he's frozen or if he's just standing really still. Ben? This one from Chase Hatchett. Is he frozen for you too, Steven?
Yeah, it's pretty frozen.
Okay. This one from Chase Hatchett says, "Man, this flat Earth debate got weird." RGK says, "For Destiny." I don't know if he's coming back, but he says, "For Destiny, we have near 1 million who now live in tents and have been displaced for a few months. How long and to what extent can this be justified?" My guess is a connection maybe dropped. But go ahead,
Maybe,
Steven,
yeah.
in terms of that question.
I mean, the humanitarian situation has the potential to be incredibly dire in the Gaza Strip. A lot of people have been displaced. A lot of infrastructure has been destroyed. A lot of homes probably have been destroyed, like completely obliterated. There's a lot of like rebuilding that needs to happen in that country. Insofar as like how long can it be sustained? I mean, once their thing is done in Rafah, I think Israel said they're about to just like change back to limited operations. So you can have people moving back into their homes and start the rebuilding process. But yeah, I mean, putting like a time limit on things is like it's very weird. We're like, oh, only like 52 people can die, or this war needs to be over in 16 weeks, or 2 years, or 15 months. Like you have to respond. I mean, the conditions change dynamically. If 4 months ago we got into a situation where 100 people were starving to death a day, well, that whatever is happening needs to wind down almost immediately. If you've got a situation where the humanitarian situation is a bit more stable, I mean, it can carry on for a bit longer. It depends. You've got to respond to situations on the ground.
This one coming in from, I think that, but don't worry, we only have like 1 or 2 more questions. Sorry, folks, if you had any questions for Ben, I don't know. I know that he's in Mexico right now, so it might be that we might not have him come back tonight if there's a storm there or something. I don't know if there is. But so yeah, there was one last question that was for Ben. And that
What was the
sorry.
question?
See, I think they were asking, I think it's supposed to be like incisive and pithy to where even if I read the question, I feel like the point will get across so strongly that I'm like, I feel like I don't want to read it without Ben being here.
I can answer. I'll give the Steelman answer for it. Go for it.
All right. If you're going to give a Steelman, they said,
Mhm.
Ben, would you give your home to a Native American?
Would you give your home to a Native American? Well, the thing is the way that the conflict works in the Middle East is who the homeowner is and who the Native American is. It really just depends on how far back you want to go. In 2005, if we go back to 2005, all the Israeli settlers there got pulled out from Sharon and they had to give their homes to Palestinians. If you go back to 67, all of those, or I'm sorry, if you go back to 73, all of those Jews, no, I'm sorry, 79, Begin made all of those Jews pull their settlements and their homes out of the Sinai. So there's two instances of like Jews having to be expelled from places. If you go back to 67, there were Arabs that fled because they were worried about expulsion after the initial war in 48, although not as many happened. In 48, there were Jews that were expelled from the West Bank. There were also a ton of Palestinians that were expelled in 47 and 48 from Israel proper. The whole Nakba, saw over 700,000 Palestinians, 700,000 Arabs in the area that were either expelled from their homes or fled because they were worried they'd be massacred. So that question, like, it really depends on, people say history doesn't start on October 7th. I mean, it depends on where the history starts. Anybody can make a justification. Just look at how messy Sheikh Jarrah is, a neighborhood in East Jerusalem where you've got people that are debating endlessly over who owns the rights to the homes. And in a way, they're kind of both right. Jordan allowed some Palestinians to move in after they captured the West Bank and arguably expelled Jews from there. Jews argue that they should have rights to that because they lived there after they occupied it, prior to 48. Like it's a dumb argument. You can't really, like, one of the things that's been said that was correct, although I don't even know if he knows why it's correct, is the appeals to history will actually leave you mired down indefinitely in this conflict because anybody can justify basically anything they fucking want if they want to appeal to some facet of history, I think. So fuck that question.
Know where Ben is. He's gone. But we hope he's okay. Ben, sorry. Really, for real. We do appreciate Ben. So, folks, do check out both Ben's link in the description box as well as Steven's. We're going to wrap up with that. I'll be back in just a few minutes. Not even that. It's going to be like 30 seconds. I'm going to let Steven go and stick around as I'll let you know about upcoming debates, including DebateCon 5 coming up this fall. It's going to be huge. Thanks so much, Steven. It's been a true pleasure as always.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Have a good night.
I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye-bye. Oh yeah, my dear friends, let me just load up this little camera here. Want to say it has been a fun time. Uh, for I, I love you, Ben. I'm sorry. So he did. I can assure you, he didn't rage quit. It was just clearly he was like mid sentence when it cut off on him. So yeah, but we're gonna have a fun time. And we want to say check out both of our guests. What are you waiting for? If you haven't already, now's the time. You can do this. And I got to tell you though, I'm gonna get my face where it shows in just a moment. There you go. Okay, here we go. I got to go in a little bit because I've got to get a couple quick little things done. But maybe you didn't hear about Modern Day Debate's new sponsor, Soylent. So, my dear friends, this is your chance. You could barely see it. The keep's going out on me. But it's not a real sponsor. I just got that as a gag. I've seen Steven with his Soylent bottle, and I thought it was like he probably just because this right now it has Diet 7 Up. I'm very big on diet soda. It was this or smoking. I was just getting too, life is just tiring. And I thought, okay, I'll just do diet soda. But it's very good stimulation, like the bubbles and stuff. Now, does anyone know? Can someone tell me, does Steven, when he has his Soylent bottle that he has in his stream, is it filled with Soylent or does he just do that as a joke and then he fills it with something else? I don't know. You got to tell me. Tell me, folks. Jeff, are you listening? Jeff, the tech guy, I hope you're doing well. I saw you sent a text, buddy. I am stoked if you're still listening, but I got to tell you, folks, here's what I'm excited about. One, this new soundboard is so fun. It's really hard for me not to play with it during the debate because I always want to like sneak in, like, if one of the debaters says something bad about the other, I want to sneak in a little bit of that. But I got to tell you, this is a custom soundboard, and it's all of my favorite ones. So it's from everywhere. So, for example, WWE type sounds, Star Wars type sounds. Let me see, where is this? I hate you! It also has, like the generic type stuff. And then, yeah, even great songs. So,
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
hmm, yes, I am very excited about the soundboard.
I like that.
But I'm gonna tell you, we hope you're doing well. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight. That's right. My Soylent is filled with I think the other night I put a protein shake in it. And but not like Soylent type soy protein, but whey protein, the good stuff. But you could always put, you could put a beer in here, you could put water. And but yeah, we should all just use Soylent bottles. And I hope I don't know if you guys are do we have any soy boys in the audience? Can you just confess it in the live chat right now? Let me know.
Soy boy! Soy boy! Soy boy! Soy boy!
But yeah, we are. I want to say hello to you in the chat. Thanks for coming by. Satiric Games, happy to have you. And Snappish Lace, thanks for coming by. And he said his Soylent bottle is actually filled with testosterone. That's right. Uh, bull semen. Is that supposed to be good for you? But let's see. I saw you said something about a whistle. Hmm. Where did I see that? Get a slide whistle one. Oh, that's a good idea. That's a but yeah, it has it's so fun. Like I'm excited, I'm in a good mood. But yes, it is good to see you there in the old live chat. And let's see here. Continuing. Pete, good to see you in the old live chat. Says stop being so coy. Biz Quick, good to see you. Hannah Anderson, thanks for all your support. Thanks for being a great mod. Josh says Destiny 100% drinks Soylent. He enjoys it. No way. Are you serious? But hey, I mean, I've it's okay. It tastes like Ensure. I think I told you. I gotta be honest. I think it doesn't even taste that good. So I feel like I remember I've had Ensure before, and I thought I remembered it tasting better than this because it doesn't. It's like meh, a little bit chalky. But good to see you there. Half Life Zerka in the old live chat. Thanks for being with us, Josh. Good to see you. Johannes Huss, thanks for dropping by. Hi, Progressive. Glad that you were here. And let's see. Human Girl, good to see you. Krishna Nix, thanks for dropping by. Josh, happy to have you here. Shayna Zion. Zion. Glad to have you with us. And thanks for your kind words, Mac Attack. Glad to have you with us as well as aka Batasai. Am I saying it right? Thanks for coming by. Why Ypsilon 138 says tastes like Ensure. Man, really selling it, James. Yeah, it's not that great. And Hole, thanks for coming by. It says modern soy debates confirmed. That's right. We love to use the fun. I've heard the soy boy term all the way back in 2016 and I still just laugh, seriously. It's just funny. So
Beta!
we like calling each other Beta and Soy Boy here. I got to tell you, you totally should get the modern day debate membership because you look at these emoticons. I'm going to show you in live chat right now. You can call your friends Soy Boy in the live chat. I'm going to put it in there right now. And you can see this little emoticon that I'm referring to. I got to get out of here though. I got to get up early in the morning. I'm excited that I'm going on a long trip and I'm really excited about it though because tomorrow. And this is like my way of treating myself because I'm pretty exhausted. I've got to be honest. I am tired. Mr. Creenan flattered me so much earlier. He said that I look tired. So I am. I'm really excited that yeah, that the Dr. James Coons at the bottom left of the screen is legit. I defended my dissertation about a month ago, and then I just submitted the manuscript with revisions to the graduate school. So I'm excited about that. Spart 344, thanks for your kind words. Says well done on getting your doctorate, much deserved. Thanks so much, Spart 344. Seriously, I really appreciate that. And so I am pretty tired though because coincidentally I started modern day debate the same year as the doctorate. So the last 6 years I've been just working my face off, trying to just crush it with everything. So I'm excited to finish the doctorate. I never thought that was going to happen. I was like, man, this is taking forever. But also really excited that Modern Day Debate, we're going to hit 190,000 subscribers probably in the next 24 hours. So that's exciting. And then probably by the end of the summer, probably about 200,000. So that's exciting to see that happen. And we have a lot of big things planned. We are definitely. I know that lately it's been a lot of like flat Earth debates, and it's like, James, come on, something new. Which tonight was something new. Last night was too. Human evolution debate. Uh, we are definitely planning in the background DebateCon 5. So it'll be in person. It'll be in the Northeast near New York City. So we're going to be in Newark, New Jersey. I'm actually going to scout places in a few weeks. So I'm going to check out hotels there, different venues, and figure out where we're going to set up shop for that. So I can assure you, Modern Day Debate is still going strong. It's just, frankly, I've been resting a bit just because I've been kind of wiped out. So I've been traveling a bit more. I'm excited though. I'm going to take a trip tomorrow. That was the wrong button. Sorry about that. I'm going to take a trip tomorrow, and that is going to be to around the world. So I'm excited about that. I really am pumped to. I feel like it'll help me recharge, and then I'm going to play some video games on the plane. I got a Switch Lite. I got to use one on eBay for 120 bucks. I'm very excited. I'm going to play so many games, N64 games, of course, because like those are the best. There's just nothing that even compares.
There is no second best.
It's only Nintendo 64, and there is no second best.
There is no second best.
If anybody knows who that is,
There is no second best.
I'll be impressed if you know whose voice that is. Because I picked that. It's not just because he's saying there is no second best. But I am pumped about the soundboard as
It's a trap.
sometimes a little bit delayed with the buttons, but yeah, we are definitely working some big things in the background. So DebateCon 5 is going to be huge.
It's all part of the plan.
And yeah. So let's see, Human Girl in the live chat. As well as, let's see. But you guys tell me in the live chat how you're doing, because I am excited to hear about it. Sir Buggy Goy, happy to have you with us. Jason Moldren, thanks for dropping by. And Mr. Creenan, happy to have you here. Shayna Zion, thanks for dropping in. Jim Carrey says, "Oh dear, close, but no, it's actually Michael Saylor." Does anyone in the live chat know who Michael Saylor is? Can you let me know if you've kind of not sure if you guys actually know. Michael Saylor is kind of a legend, if you ask me. So I'm really excited about that. He is, yeah, I would say he's changing the world. So that's exciting. It's a big deal. Chris G says, LLL James, no smoking. I promise. No smoking here. I've been being healthy. Worst I have had a lot of junk food, but you got to live a little bit. So that's been enjoyable. And yeah, so I've been happy to be able to rest lately. Let's see. Norek, thanks for coming by. It says Michael Saylor, Moon. That's right. Michael Saylor. He is a savage. He is one of the coolest people ever, an inspiration to me. So, yeah. And let's see. Mr. Greening, good to see you. Chris G, stoked to have you with us for real, buddy. Thanks for being here. Chris G and Human Girl and Hannah Anderson. I'm trying to think, is there anybody else in live chat right now that's been here for 6 years? But yeah, you guys, it's been a long time. If you think about it, it's like, wow, 6 years, it's a long time. And I'm excited though about Modern Day Debate. We've got a lot of fun stuff coming up. So let's see. Pete says less carbs, more protein. I agree with you. Yeah, that's smart. And let's see. If you didn't know, Modern Day Debates Discord is linked in the description box. What are you waiting for? Check out the Modern Day Debate Discord. And let's see here.
A few moments later.
KC Industry, good to see you there in the old live chat. Magic Sticks 1604, thanks for coming by. Poll, good to see you with us. Says Boomer Factoids. I always like being called a boomer because I feel like it is like it sounds powerful. So it makes me feel like powerful. And Bobby Watley, thanks for coming by. Human Girl says stoked to be here. She's always trying to be funny. It's really sad. But let's see. Good one, Human Girl. And then let's see. Yeah, we have a WWE ring bell. Pretty cool. Not bad. Let's see. I think I played all of them for you guys now. Let me see if I. Nope, this one. We should play this at the start.
Let's get ready to rumble!
This is like the sound that Human Girl hears when she goes out in public and people see her face. But yeah, they don't really say that when they see Human Girl. But let's see. We gotta play that.
Bow to the masters. Break it down.
We should play that when someone is like breaking down a complex subject. We'll play that.
Bow to the masters. Break it down.
Don't forget to hit that like button. We'd really do appreciate it.
Do it.
Right now. Do it. Don't wait. And don't be a
Beta!
let's see. Did I get all these? Oh yeah. Let's see. This is what I'm going to do to you. Agent Black says you're so silly, James. This is what I'm gonna do to you if I see you in real life. I won't really kill you. Okay. But yeah.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I love that we have like plays on words, you know.
I
that we
find your
can
lack
use.
of faith disturbing.
Let's see, for religion debates we can use that, and then let's see.
Liar!
Oh, we played that already. That's Anakin.
I hate you!
We'll have to play that if one of the nasty to the other one.
Hello there.
All right, I've got to go. No more, no more of the soundboard. It's Norex says I'm gonna wring your neck. I wish I could get Fred Herbert. I could play Fred soundboards, but yeah. So I want to say I hate leaving. I'm just enjoying this so much. I just want to stay longer, but I have to get up early, so I should. But yeah, thanks for all of your support, gang. Appreciate it. And you guys are pretty cool. And let's see. Dunkin' Donut says, did Ben mention about how much he's enjoying the Acolyte? He never shuts up about it. Oh gosh. You know what? This is the first time I ever ended Disney Plus. And I told them when I canceled my subscription, I just was like honest and I just said the Acolyte absolutely sucks. I didn't like Obi-Wan either. The show. I love Ewan McGregor. But the show just was like story was just kind of lame. Yeah, just I don't know. I thought Book of Boba Fett was actually underrated. I actually thought that was pretty cool. Now, yeah, I got that Nintendo Switch I mentioned, Nintendo Switch Lite. Um, and I'm excited. I'm going to play on the while traveling. I'm going to play Zelda Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. I'm so excited to catch up on these classics. The Zelda games are my favorites. Ocarina of Time is my favorite of all time. So, yeah, thank you for your support. If you haven't yet, check out the Modern Day Debate podcast. For real. Listen to debates on the go. That way, if you're on a plane and they don't have Wi-Fi, which happens sometimes the Wi-Fi doesn't work if you're, especially if you're flying Spirit. Sometimes they just don't have Wi-Fi in some airlines, especially if it's like an overnight flight. A lot of times they'll give you the shitty plane because they're like, well, people will be asleep anyway, so it doesn't even have Wi-Fi sometimes. And so The podcast is cool that way. You don't have to rely on Wi-Fi or data. You can listen anytime you want. Human Girl says, nice. I'm playing Breath of the Wild. I think I remember you telling me that like 2 years ago and you thought you were so cool. But can I play Breath of the Wild on Nintendo Switch Lite? I don't know. I gotta figure that out because I do want to play new ones. I've never played Twilight Princess, and so I'm hoping that they put that on the Switch Lite to buy. Like I'd be like, hey, I'd give you my hard-earned money. I'd pay you for that, but I like Nintendo doesn't offer it. Anyway, hopefully they'll put it on there soon. I gotta go. It's getting late. Thanks for all your support. Love you guys. See you at the next one. Keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. We'll see you next time.
Beta!